Israel's nuclear capability in terms of weapons?
I can't comment on that specific question. I'd have to refer you to the Israelis on that.
Does Israel have nuclear weapons?
I'm not prepared to comment on that.
You're not prepared to comment on it? It's a very basic question. We are with an ally conducting a war against Iran. This war continues to escalate. Tell us something, as Congress, as the oversight body, what is Israel's nuclear capability in terms of weapons?
I can't comment on that specific question. I'd have to refer you to the Israelis on that.
Does that mean you don't know?
I can't comment on that, sir.
You're the main person in charge of knowing this and understanding it. Will you not give us an answer? I don't understand why this issue is so taboo when it's a basic question and we're in a war alongside Israel against Iran. We're dealing with the potential for nuclear fallout, and you won't answer this basic question.
Well, again, it would be outside of my purview as the Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Undersecretary to discuss that specific question.
Sir, that is a dereliction of duty.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. Or 2026. Make sure I said that correctly. Thank you for joining me today. Pretty much an entire follow-up from yesterday's show. There was a few other things that I was deciding to whether or not to get into. Topics that I'm sure you're seeing go. I'm going to get to them all tomorrow, not even to go over them to start today. I'll be doing a show tomorrow so we can catch up on some of the stuff that I pushed off. More so a lot of the things that I tend to cover in the beginning that I think are important just to make sure you don't miss in passing. But today I decided just to kind of follow up on this one point of the story that I think is really important. Like I said yesterday, and even more because of how it developed. Now, if you've been watching the last 2-3 shows, you've seen the way this is developed. Now, most people don't stay that tuned in to the day-to-day. Now, that's just the reality. I've learned that over the years, as much as I find that confounding. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I can remember back when I was at a point when I wasn't doing this. The bottom line is most people don't stay tapped into the day-to-day. So they get the headlines, they get the kind of framing, which that's how they often manipulate people because the corporate media is very much a part of that game, whether they know it or not. The editorial board, the way that they kind of control the flow. Like Asal Rod doing a great job every day showing you how the New York Times is just using language, manipulating the way you view one story versus the other, even though it's the same action, depends on who carries it out, they frame it differently. It's very simple. But so my point, though, is that if you followed these over the few days, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what a lot of people are starting to really come to, acknowledge, even if they support Trump, that you're seeing with his rhetoric, where either he's trying to be confusing, which, you could maybe argue that that's a tactic. That's a political tactic, even though it's very frustrating and insulting to the people who are supposed to be, he's lying to everybody. But you could argue that's a tactic and even argue it's because of political manipulation and that's just the way the world is. I would even understand that argument. The point, though, is that you have to acknowledge that we're being misled, even if it's a tactic. And what we're seeing is a continual misrepresentation. And it says one thing, the next day it changes. And then it changes a third way the next day. And then maybe it goes back to the beginning. And it just keeps doing this. Every topic you pick. In regard to this discussion, I think it's a really important thing to notice this conversation flow going from, I could go back many steps from the way it started, the illegal actions, right? The claims within the original ceasefire offer from Trump through Italy that Iran denied. They said flatly no. Then Trump, angered by that, I argue, turned out and said only absolute surrender. And then like a day later started talking about peace talks again. And and you could argue he changed his mind every day. But then we get into the conversation of this, and then in there, a very important conversation starting being had by most people, it seems, acknowledging that Israel seems to be dictating the war. And hopefully when you look into that, you start to realize it's a lot more than just this war. But either way, it's becoming a very important conversation, nothing other than Israel's government having control over policy, like a lot of governments try to do everywhere in the world. So it shouldn't even be that hard to wrap your mind around. Then we get into the point of this alleged defector, which is something, this is a word that has been used, but weirdly enough, it's sort of, let's just make it simple for people to understand. Trump put forward, he was discussing potential, peace talks weren't really used, but an end to the war. And speaking with somebody who was not Khamenei's son and not the current leadership, but somebody who was high up in there, highly respected, and then, about the transition to new power. And so that's, to be clear, not the Iranian current leadership. That's what he said over the last couple of days. And then, of course, the point was, and we're going to read through all this, I'm just trying to give you a, start point, is that then we got the point where he said, well, I'm going to obliterate all of your power structures and infrastructure if you don't do this within so many days. And then ultimately that time came. And that's where you got this interesting new person speaking to us conversation. If you watched, you got the sense that I doubt this very, very seriously for many reasons, which we'll go through all this again in case this isn't lining up for you. And what we've continued to see since then is Trump then, and this is just the last 24 hours, deal with the Iranian government. So that has to mean something. And is it possible he's doing both of those things simultaneously? Of course it is. But when you get into the details, and again, not the headlines, but the details, the in between, not every 24 hours, but moment kind of conversations, you start to see that there's more to the story. And I think it's important to recognize that if he's now dealing with the Iranian leadership that he just told you were worthless and have no power, and Jesse Waters said they're all hiding in separate places with their phones, all scared and hiding in the woods and whatever they're telling you, but now they're dealing with them. Or they're entirely obliterated and they're so weak and they can't even stand up and no one knows what's happening, but we're going to give them a deal. But they're terrorists and they shouldn't be there at all because they're killing everyone in the world, but we're going to make a ceasefire agreement to let them stay in power even though they're about to die. I mean, a child can see that this doesn't line up. Now, to assume what it means is irresponsible. It's not the right path. Even though I think it's kind of easy to see where the most likely path goes, we should wait to prove it. But like I'm saying is there's a moment right there where you can't deny that there's dishonesty happening. So what is it driving it? Is it Israel manipulating Trump? Is it Trump becoming aware he's being manipulated and changing direction? Is this all of them in line with a larger play? Is it about something larger than just Iran? We should always be asking these questions. And we're going to address all of this throughout the show today. Now, it's likely going to be somewhat shorter. I'm not going to promise that because who knows where the conversation takes us, but I imagine this will be shorter than usual. That's a guess. But there's only one real point we're going to get into, one real general, aim for today's show. I actually wanted to start with an article that this point seems to have kind of gotten buried and now is becoming a lot more relevant as we're going to end with the discussions of potential troops, ground troops, and what that means with all of this conversation is included. But let's not forget this conversation that Mike Preisner, activist, independent media, and works with he's a veteran himself and he works with veterans. Excuse me. And he was the one that reported through his sources and people he spoke with and his own coalition, who speaks with a lot of veterans, that they were being deployed, boots on the ground. They were being told this. And in fact, or rather, excuse me, I take one step back. They were told it was a training mission. And that was the kind of the story, as the headline reads, reports of U.S. servicemen deployed under a guise of training, which, as I said then, and I don't think there are any, the military probably lies to people all the time, including their own people, or feels they don't have an obligation to tell them. That's not the point, though. It's about why, they're supposed to be honoring the servicemen and they're tricking them and going to war. Then once it was, I'll become aware that they were not on a training mission, the reporting was that it was boots on the ground. Now, that wasn't definitively about Iran, but like I said, the last so many reports, if you're deploying personnel in the Middle East, while you're clearly engaging in this war against Iran, then that's boots on the ground, guys. That's what that is. They're deployed. They're in warfare. There's killing going on. There's bombings. And we know that there are people that were already engaged, whether Kurds or people we talked about from the very beginning that have been going on a long time before we got to this point. But if they were already deploying people, then we should factor that into the conversation. And I think that's important to see, not just because that means war, but because of when they were doing that and then what they're claiming is happening since. Seems to, again, belie the point. It undermines what they claim they're trying to accomplish, whether it's the lies of diplomacy when all they want is destruction, which is pretty much what always happens, and that's not my opinion. It's outcome. It's observation and outcome. You can see what they're doing. Or there's a lot of factors you could include, but I think at the end of the day, it does open the door to there's a bigger story than just what they're presenting to us. And then, of course, Trump is resetting the world, which is another important point a part that I was going to start with today, but we'll get into more tomorrow. Palantir stuff and new developments in that direction of technocracy and the invasiveness of this technological, apparatus, I guess. It's not just Palantir, but again, we'll get to that more tomorrow. But the idea of how that connects with the larger global conversation and Graham literally telling you he's resetting the world while talking about Iran. And, there's more to this. But keeping in mind this deployment and the conversation around it and the manipulation of our own troops, March 8th, 2026. So also the show we just had the day before on the 23rd, Iranian revolution yet again exposes Israeli plot. Now, this came from reporting that was from within Israel inner circle, as well as the United States government. And the reality was that Netanyahu was speaking to his own people and saying, Trump's going to stop this thing. We have to keep pushing this. And many other points that show you that it's not. And of course, those could be lies. Always consider that. The reality, though, is every other one before this has proven to have been manipulated by them, like this already was, like our coverage and everyone else has already shown. The point is that on top of that, it was the part that became even more clear was that Netanyahu was driving this and at least arguing, or the reporting was arguing that he was doing it against what Trump was trying to accomplish. Now, that doesn't, in my mind, give Trump a pass on anything, because he's clearly been an active player in this. But I do think, like I said yesterday, that there's parts of both of this. I think it's clear, as I was showing you Dan Cohen saying yesterday, like it's kind of absurd to claim that Trump was not outwardly, publicly telling you he was going to do this. So saying he was forced into this that seems like a pass for people who want to pretend Trump's not responsible. But you can also clearly point out that Israel has always been and is still in many ways manipulating the U.S. government, and maybe with their knowledge, maybe blackmail, something like that, or lies, or many different things. And I think both are happening, as I think I've gone through very clearly. And I think it's important not to, draw a line in the sand and pretend it's one or the other when none of us really know for sure. Question these things. But that the ultimate revolution that they claim started this, the protests, were exposed as another plot that they were building. That's the main part of the article we discussed on the 23rd, was that they were building this. And it's admitted to. And I'm not even talking about arming the Kurds or admitting from both sides of the U.S. and Israel governments they were arming the people they claimed they were trying to help fight, protest their government. That's just an illegal insurgency. But on top of that it was clear they were trying to create this for a really long time, as according to Israeli personnel and media, and ultimately failed. And now it was reported that, looking back, well, clearly the Iranian people are not just flowing through the streets calling for the U.S. to keep bombing. They don't support this. And they admitted that from Israeli media. And so the reality is they lied to you, just like every other time. Now, yesterday we talked about, and the first part of this, that like I said yesterday, we talked about Palantir AI now is the core U.S. military system. We're going to get more of that tomorrow. The second part of it was doubts about Trump's alleged Iran negotiator deepen. So this has been an evolving conversation. So this brings us to today, and I'll start with an article that kind of gives you a brief kind of overview of the last so many days. But this already on the 24th, we were already feeling that this, and my kind of joke image here was that's clearly it's somebody not who I don't feel it's an Iranian or genuinely speaking for the Iranian people who was in negotiation with Trump. And I was getting the sense that maybe Trump doesn't know that. Just a thought. And the idea being that, he gave him a present, which I didn't mention at the beginning, which how does that line up with you now engaging with the Iranian government, which is happening? And then the Iranian government turning that down. We'll get into all of this. But that ultimately there's possibilities here that Israel is, I was speaking with Robert this morning about this, that Israel is fronting and playing as some kind of an Iranian to trick Trump, right? Or that it is an Iranian, but it doesn't represent the Iranian people. Or what if it's the Shah? I mean, wouldn't that actually make sense? Because Trump and the rest of them have been telling you that he's the leader. So when he starts speaking to the Shah, because no one in Iran will talk to him and they just pretend like that's the agreement, is that not, I mean, you see how perfectly that lines up, but that's just one of the many thoughts. And then they pretend like they have some kind of agency because he's the leader, right? They did it with Guaido. It's the same kind of tactic. The difference here is they have even less support than they did in Venezuela. So from that point, let's start with an article from Robert that came out today. And I think he did an excellent job on this. This image just cracks me up. This is basically just Trump underwater is the idea, and Iranian ships kind of surrounding him, and then an Israeli anchor holding him down is kind of like a perfect analogy for, or rather, symbolism for where we are. The title is Strategic Failure. Trump's contradictory Iran strategy unravels. And he does a great job breaking this down. And there's new parts from today that aren't in this, but really it's still sound based on the logic. The only difference is what I mentioned on the new plans being proposed. So the interesting part here is that not just the immediacy, like the last so many days, but the entire strategy. As experts, whatever you want to think that means, whether State Department fake information experts or experts in the actual information, or just people who are students of all of this, have been telling you for a long time that this is inconsistent. Or, for example, here's a small point. The CIA and intelligence told Trump that this was not going to work, that doing this would not actually decapitate the leader. And so did pretty much everybody else except Israel. And who did he listen to? Israel, assuming he made that decision and maybe it was outside of his choice. But there was a lot of those kind of examples where it seems that he's been putting forward a narrative that contradicts the actual reality, the facts on the ground, or what seems to be the most logical, or what's in the interest of Americans. And so he's been putting forward a lot of these narratives that are now coming to pass and contradicting itself and showing you that either he is lost to just desperately lying, or he's not aware of what's really going on. I'm not sure what's more alarming. U.S. President Donald Trump appears to be continually backtracking and/or contradicting himself on his various announcements regarding Iran. While his rhetoric attempts to project dominance, the administration's actions reflect a state of crisis and suggest that it is being forced to back down, which is pretty much what Iran is pushing. That's what I said yesterday, too, is it's almost like it doesn't seem like a wise tactic for them, because he clearly seems to be trying to find a way around to get away from this, is my opinion. And so for Iran to come out and poke him in the eye and call him a loser, which was when they put that video out, and to basically make a big point about how you're backing down, you're losing. As much as I agree, it seems like that would drive somebody like Trump to just irrationally do the opposite. That's just how low of opinion I have of people in government. But I think this is kind of, the obvious reality of what the facts show right now. And again, we went over yesterday the reality of the interceptors and the drones, and how despite them, again, those kind of points where they just will yell, they're completely defeated. They have no means to do what they have been doing all day, by the way, or today, where they were bombing, and yesterday, in ways that demonstrate that they're increasing their volume. And so they're proving that these people are lying about them. Now, if the U.S. has to lie about their abilities, that either means that or if it said that it is a lie, that either means that they didn't know that was the case, which suggests they don't really know what's going on, or that they lied about it, suggesting they had to because they're not in a good position. That seems to be most logical, but there's a lot of those. And so we have seen the reality now, and the evidence is showing that they are in this for the long game, and that they can essentially indefinitely continue to cause these problems for specifically the U.S. and Israel. And the Strait of Hormuz is the factor we keep talking about. It's not closed down, as we'll get into. It is restricted heavily, mostly through threats. And I think through the U.S. and Israel convincing everybody else that they're in danger by trying, even though Iran's saying it's only the U.S. and Israel. By effect, and I would argue by the U.S. and media framing it that way, has a dramatically decreased the tankers that are going through, mostly just Iranian tankers. But even today, I guess they just let somebody through, and they're basically saying, look, we're not restricting anybody but these people. So it's kind of a mirage, and I think that's important to hear. But all of that to say is that they could take further action, and that doing that is a game. It's a tactic they're playing and putting Israel and the U.S. in a very bad position. After issuing a 48-hour ultimatum to the Islamic Republic of Iran, demanding that it reopen the strait, and this is over the last 3 days, or face strikes on their energy infrastructure, which, again, let's be clear, was a crime, or would be. There's no legal justification to strike their infrastructure just because you're hindering his ability to, claim he's successful, and, oil sales and oil prices that are hurting his personal agenda. So they said, if you don't do this, what we want, we will commit those war crimes, which is, there's no question, okay? Targeting infrastructure for civilians is a crime. So you can argue he wasn't intending to do it, but it's still a threat of a war crime. And it says, and despite the strait only ever being restricted to the U.S., Israel, and their co-belligerents, which is just a legal term from an international law standpoint, means people who are alongside them committing the war. Trump appeared to be backing down on Monday. Suddenly, now again, this is the 48-hour period where he was saying, look, you better step down. And he's done that many times and then not followed through. So now it was like hours before that 48-hour window was going to come down. Iran was just publicly laughing at them from the very beginning of when he said that. Clear they weren't going to stop or were going to capitulate. And it says, suddenly, after this point, the president began claiming that he was conducting negotiations with a defector from Tehran, and that a deal was within reach in 5 days, which there's a very clear point people are making today about the timing of the markets and just arbitrarily aiming at the end of the market point. I mean, I'll just show you right now. Chris Martenson points this out. If nobody goes to jail for this, we've entered the every man for himself stage of the empire decline. Traders placed $580 million in oil bets ahead of Trump's social media posts on Iran talks. Now, there's more. If you read into this, the reality seems to be, and this is what many financial people are saying, is that you can very clearly see that there's people who have inside knowledge about things he's about to do and then make actions based on things that he's about to do. And then many people are simply responding to what he's saying on social media as well. But there is inside levels to this. And so what we're basically finding out is this whole weird 5-day window seems to be specifically about manipulating the oil prices, which some people think that's it. I think there's more to it, but if that was it, that means that the whole thing of Defector was a made-up story. Just to get a little bit of relief, and artificially so, which is only going to make it spring back more, in my opinion. But everything they're doing is artificial in the way they're trying to lower these prices, which is why it springs back every time they do it. As of right now, last I checked, it went down a little bit, but then it went back over 100. Could be different right now. And again, I'm like Brent Crew. There's different versions, but just for the point, it's higher than it should be. And it says, where was I? That he even stated that Tehran had agreed to concessions that would reopen the Persian Gulf. Again, they're not agreeing to that. That's just clear. They've made that, and I'll get into their statement as of the last time I checked, which is like, what you said means nothing. We have our statements. We're not going to back down until you give up, until you basically stop conducting your illegal wars and stop bombing people for no reason. You know, you can disagree with the framing. Whatever you think, they've drawn their line, and they're like, we don't want to talk. Here's what we demand. If you don't want to do that, then we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to only restrict you in the Strait. That's where we're at. So having them claiming they have concessions to reopen it, unless it comes to pass and you find out there was somebody randomly behind someone we didn't know about speaking who has the ability to make all this happen, this seems like an outright lie. Whether they're speaking with somebody or not, the claim, for example, they agreed to have no nuclear weapons. Well, or a way to frame this is him just kind of intentionally misframing what actually went down. For example, they've always said they don't have nuclear weapons. They've always said they're not seeking it. The evidence has always backed that up. Now, of course, you could argue that they have a secret one or they're being lied to. The evidence doesn't show that, not from the U.S. government, not from the IAEA. Only Israel is the one lying about that, and then the U.S. as well. So the point, where was that? Shoot, I just lost it. I just completely lost my point. There was a post that I was going to show. Well, the nuclear point, God, I'm going to forget that entirely. That's so frustrating. Well, where I was leaving off, he stated that Tehran had agreed to concessions that would reopen the Persian Gulf. It wasn't obviously closed or restricted. God, there's a point I was making there. Sometimes I wish I could just rewind, because as you guys know well, if we watch this show regularly, my mind jumps from point to point, and ultimately sometimes I drop it when I'm trying to go back to the other one. Well, I'm sure I've gone over the nuclear point many times there, but ultimately the idea was the lie about the nuclear technology, I think, was pretty clear. All the evidence shows that, but the idea, that's what it was. Thank God. The point about, they promised they're going to get rid of the nuclear technology. So if you're going to say that, are you saying that they're still doing what they've always done and framing that as, they finally agreed because I'm a master deal maker? I think that may be the real possibility here. Or it's simply that they didn't say anything and he's just saying what the current reality is that we actually know is what I got to happen, and acting like the deal was done because we are there, even though that was always where we already were. That seems like a very desperate play if that's the reality. Now, it says Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei quickly rejected the U.S. leader's claims, asserting that no negotiations had taken place and that Iran's position regarding the Strait of Hormuz and conditions to end the imposed war has not changed. Now, that was them speaking up about a proposed deal. And then later, the media asked and he insinuated that it was somebody else. Iranian officials then began offering that their analysis that the White House's change in tone was a deception aimed at making a retreat from Tehran's threats to attack Iran's electrical infrastructure while preparing for a possible ground offensive involving boots on the ground. Now, well, here's an interesting point, by the way. I theorized about this being a possibility before I saw anybody else talk, which is pretty much always what that show is like, because I'm not out there reading everybody else's comments before I go on my show. I'm looking at source material, just giving you what I think. often I miss things because I'm not reading everybody else's commentary. But either way, I think it keeps it fresh and objective and not trying to make it what anybody else is saying. But the point here, preparing for possible ground offensive on boots on the ground. This aligns with facts on the ground that Western corporate media have failed to highlight. Not only were 2,500 Marines sent on their way to the Persian Gulf, but estimates suggest that up to 5,000 could arrive in the region by Friday. A frequently discussed target of any ground operation has been Iran's Karg Island. Damn it. For some reason, my mind is just jumping all over the place today. Iran officials have begun offering an analysis. The White House's change in tone was a deception aimed at making a retreat from Trump's threats. What was that? While preparing for a possible ground invasion. Well, either way, one of the things important to point out is that what we're talking about is that they're in a position of weakness and that Donald Trump ultimately decided to back away from the crimes that were threatened in order to try to get their concession. But, either way, what we're seeing is that them creating a situation where they're calling their bluff. And I think that's really important because Trump has continued to be caught with doing that. But so in this case, the 5,000 is the combination of 3,000 or 2,500 and 3,000 troops that they are now kind of combining. Now that, again, is not like a definitive boots on the ground Iran, but we're talking about an action that is the same point in regard to the Middle East war that we're talking about. Attacks on Iran's civilian energy sector is a dangerous gamble, Robert points out. And I think this is really important because this speaks to the kind of dishonesty we're dealing with here. That they've been telling us this entire time, this is going to be a one-off 3 days, 4 to 6 weeks is this time frame they're pointing to. But they kept telling you it's going to be over so fast. Now, this point is about the threats of power structures, but it's the same point with everything else, or rather power infrastructure, is that they will threaten a lot of things. They will bluster a lot of things, and a lot of this comes from nonsense. Now, in this case, had they gone through with this, which is the point of the bluff, is that it is objectively something that would have been just a quagmire and would have responded with something that would have utterly destroyed far more in response from what Iran would do to us in compared to what they would have or could have done to Iran. Power plants are difficult, he writes, Robert, to destroy and would require multiple waves of concentrated attacks to take offline, which would be the point, right? Iran has over 400 power plants in total, including some 150 major ones. Its largest site, the Damavand combined cycle power plant, supplies only 3.7 to 4% of the country's total electricity needs, even if the U.S. and Israel managed to destroy it, which would demand significant firepower. Given that Tehran's infrastructure is hardened for war, again, the point of them planning for this, the Iranian retaliation would ultimately follow. Now, by comparison, Israel only has 5 major power stations, more than just 5, but 5 major power stations. Its largest, the Orat Rebin plant in Hadira, provides roughly 20% of Israel's total power needs. Taking it out would cause a far greater catastrophe. The Gulf states also have a much smaller number of power plants. Bahrain, for example, relies on only a few. And these countries consume around 5 times more electricity than per capita than Iran. So if you're missing the point, the idea is simply that should they have done this, it would have taken a lot of effort, a lot of very expensive munitions to maybe take it offline. And remember, they planned for this and insulated these things, and then they would have responded. I mean, maybe. I would still argue, my point is before from yesterday, is even if they did it first and Iran responds with civilian infrastructure, it's a crime either way. And all that would do is basically make what they did justifiable. Because then later looking back, well, they both did the crime. I would argue that the right response would be to not do that. But, we're being driven into a direction where it's like, well, there's nothing you can do. When they do it, then you have to, or you're going to lose. And I don't agree with that. But because, you lose more than just, you lose everything if you end up becoming what they are to maybe win that war. But the problem is that the strategy is that if they responded, they would be able to strike easier and take out more potential electricity, effectively hurting far more people than what they did to them, and have shown clearly with the last 12-day war point and everything since that they have the ability to get through their defenses. And so this seemed like just bad calculus, but I think at the end of the day, they weren't really going to do it, or Israel was going to drive it, knowing that this would be something that would largely hurt more the U.S., it would look like. In other words, he writes, Iran is a far less vulnerable than the U.S. allies to attacks on energy infrastructure, in addition to threatening retaliation against power plants on the other side. The Islamic Republic also warned that it could, if it wanted to, target water desalination facilities. Again, Iran relies on desalination facilities for only a tiny fraction of its water needs, low single digits, in fact, while Gulf states like Qatar and Kuwait depend on it for 90% of more of their needs. So their vulnerability is obvious. And so they have that ability, should they want to press that. But the question is, will they? And I doubt they will if it's not done first, or if at all, really. And that's not my opinion. It's demonstrated by their restraint over all of this time. One other point that I was going to add is, and I'll get to it at the end actually, but there's an interesting, think just about the energy stuff. It's obvious to point out that a lot of us have been covering the transition. And I mean, not even just like what I'm talking about today with this obvious addition to it, but going back before the Great Reset, infrastructure issues, lockdowns, right? And that lockdowns in regard to COVID, right? But now a lot of people are suddenly talking about, and rightly so, to certain degrees, energy lockdowns. So if you're interested in this topic, I recommend you look to somebody like Jason Bassler, or if people in the IMA, my personal opinion. Nonetheless, not nonetheless, but in addition to that, the point is that this is a real thing, and they're very clearly, in my mind, trying to transition society into some new form of governance, new form of structure. So I think that necessitates the collapse of the current system to justify the new one. So one of the thoughts, and this should, I hope just for the moment, just disconnect this from the current conversation, is that ultimately we're talking about the effort to try to drive us into accepting what is something that many of us don't actually want. And that's just a larger point to just any of these things, whether it's less control, less freedom, and so in this case, a system of like the new technocratic 15-minute city dynamic, digital everything, like that's what they're building. So the question is this in any way related to that point? And because right now what we're seeing is Steve and I talked about the International Energy Agency, which is separate, not the same as the Atomic Energy Agency. And they put out a document discussing why we need to restrict and pull back on energy because of the Iran war. So let's not miss the point that that's not even debatable. That is an illegal war started by the U.S. and Israel that is having byproducts that restrict what you can do in your lives. And what is the U.S. government, left and right, and the media, left and right, telling you? Take it on the chin for going after Iran, just like with the Ukraine. That all the Republicans made fun of then are now going, take it on the chin for Ukraine, Iran or Israel. So the ultimate point is that I think we can see how these things might connect, and that this very well could be part of a larger strategy to destroy oil infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And even more so, you should question whether that all of these people might be involved with some larger global play. Now, it's a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around. I get it. I would even argue with what we're looking at, that seems less likely than the inner dynamic for many reasons. But that's just my opinion based on limited information, because I think both are clearly happening. The question is, one, is this driving you there? Is that by design? And then would Iran be a part of that manipulation? Now, again, I'm just going to point that out at the end with a really great article discussing that. And I think it's worth your time to consider that, even if it's not something you think is the reality, because that's how you should think about this. It's not always one or all or nothing, or one or the other. Sometimes it's a mixed bag. And so right now you get that kind of line where people are saying, no, it's all part of the global thing, and you're falling into the trap of the inside of it. Maybe, but considering both of those views or all of the views is the right way to go. It's the right way to look at this. So, in other words, Iran is far less vulnerable to these type of attacks. So had they have done this, it would have been a very, very bad move for them. And still, I think Israel might drive this into reality. Again, Iran relies on, well, I said that earlier, far less, especially with the water. They need 90% of their needs from those things that they could bomb. Iran only gets, low single digits from what they've built themselves in a direction that insulates them from these kind of attacks. Now, here's the post, by the way, the video of Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, openly saying, no, the Hormuz is open. It's open for everybody. It's closed for Zionists. And what he says in there is, the enemies, the people attacking us in this war. And maybe he's lying about that. But as I've shown you before, I don't think I have it up today, there's tons of traffic going through there. Now, what I did, like more so today than in previous days, there's very, very little, if not any, traffic in regard to tankers. And I think that's indicative of the fact that I think it's from the propaganda side of the West media is convincing people everywhere that there's a threat, when there's no indication of that whatsoever, other than what they're claiming they're actually saying. And I think that's important to think about, because when's the last time Iran sunk or attacked, outside of the limpet mind back and forth, the manipulation that very much was a manipulation from Trump and Bolton last time. As gas prices steadily rose, he then announced, back to the story, Trump then announced that that the war was, in effect, over somehow. Right, even though we're in the middle of a potential negotiation to do that very thing you said, because this might end the war. And then somehow, before that's even complete, it's over anyway. And again, I don't know why that's not weak, like desperate. Like that shows something that's like saying they surrendered when they bombed and the other Middle East elements didn't respond. Iran, they bombed them and they didn't respond. And they said, okay, well, if you stop helping them, we'll stop bombing you. And then they continue to bomb the US and Israel. And Trump framed that as surrender. I mean, I don't know what you call that other than desperate, weakness, misrepresentation. If you're strong, you don't need to do that. And it says the war being over is obviously a blatant falsehood, apparently designed to temporarily lower gas prices. Later, he called on everyone from NATO allies to rivals like China to help ensure the free flow of tankers through the Persian Gulf, which, remember, nobody wanted to help. Not their allies, not Australia, not Japan, even the UK, last I checked, said we're looking for other viable alternatives because, as Robert Riley points out, it's a dangerous situation. And if they join this, then they're now co-belligerents, as Iran at least sees it as, and they, at the tightest choke point, can simply just lob missiles at them should they want to. Now, question is, will they? But see, they're not willing to put themselves in that position for something that I think, whether they say it out loud or not, is very clearly a war of aggression. First, he said NATO would help. Then claimed the U.S. did not even need its allies, before labeling NATO cowards for refusing to offer their naval vessels for a mission to break the restrictions imposed on the Strait of Hormuz. Subsequently, the idea emerged of using U.S. ground forces to seize Iranian territory, specifically Karg Island, which I'm thinking is a clear part of the possibility of whatever gift we're talking about that he was given, or maybe he wants you to think he was given that so they can just seize it. But Robert addresses that in this discussion about how dangerous that would be because of how easily they would be a target there. Senator Lindsey Graham, who reportedly holds sway over the president's decision-making, has lobbied hard for this option, a move heavily favored, of course, by the Israeli lobby. When recently challenged on the viability of deploying ground troops to Karg Island during a Fox News interview, Senator Graham asserted it could be done and referred the host to the Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II, which was roundly criticized because it was, as he writes, notoriously bloody. Like one of the worst in memory, and around 26,000 U.S. service members, and not necessarily the numbers, but it was apparently just a brutal battle, sparking backlash against the Republican senator. Because, we're being told no wars, no boots on the ground, limited strikes, and now we're at the point where we're like, it's comparing it to like one of the worst battles in World War II. That's not even mission creep. That's just, I don't even know what you call that. Even assuming the U.S. military succeeding in capturing Karg Island or any other island, Iranian island, it would not change the reality in the Persian Gulf. At best, Trump could claim a symbolic victory while his soldiers faced constant drone and missile fire. And it really would be symbolic because, you could argue that they might be able to gain something from it, oil and otherwise, but if you're being bombed and they're able to, I guess at best you could turn that into sort of you being the victim in the situation, but that'd be a hard sell for where we are. Moreover, seizing an island, he writes, would not magically remove the U.S.-Israeli restrictions placed on the Strait of Hormuz, right? They would continue to do what they were already doing. So it wouldn't ultimately accomplish anything other than maybe gaining control over the oil resources right there. Iran can still target ships, which is not nothing, right? But again, bombing would stop that. Iran can still target ships with missiles and drones from the mainland. Simply sinking a few vessels, should they want to, with mines or otherwise, would physically block the passage. Now remember, these are things that have long been threatened and stated, like from the U.S. claiming they'll always do this, should we do anything? And there's been so many examples where they've had the opportunity, in this case, a legal opportunity to respond in the ways they've always claimed that they desperately want to, and they did not. Another potential factor is the future involvement of Egypt, which shows signs of being pressured to participate. If Cairo does eventually involve itself, Iran or the Ansar Allah movement, which the State Department have labeled the Houthi rebels, as Robert points out, to as always, they give them a name that's supposed to make them seem like, the rebel terrorists, as opposed to the Ansar Allah movement, which is largely supported by the people of Yemen. But it says if it eventually does involve itself, Iran or the Ansar Allah movement could block the Suez Canal. So remember the point here for the other side of this. If you go around the landmass and up the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that's the Suez Canal with Egypt and going over to the other, body of water. And so that's why they've always wanted to control both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and have been basically committing genocide to just maybe control those areas, and why they overthrew and placed a puppet in Egypt, which is Sisi, which is a very public and very easy to understand story. And so now they have control over that through Egypt, but the point is because they do not have control over the Houthis, the Ansar al movement, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that they could eventually decide to try to block the Suez Canal. Another key global trade checkpoint. The Egyptian economy is already suffering as a result of the war, and its crisis could deepen if it's forced by its Gulf Arab and Israeli U.S. allies to make itself a factor on their side. Now, think about this. Egypt is suffering from the war. A lot of them are. Now, why isn't everybody in the world right now, and I think they actually are, turning around and going, why do we keep doing this? Why are we allowing these belligerents to constantly hurt us? And it's not even just these governments, I don't think, care about their people. They are hurting from this. Their interests are being hurt. And then also the peoples of these areas. Now it says no option available to the U.S. president will get him out of this strategic check he's put himself in. Meanwhile, Iran's oil production has skyrocketed. I find this crazy, by the way, reaching a 46-year high right now. At the same time, prices for goods inside of Iran have decreased. That should really bother the American Republicans who are arguing that this is somehow, hashtag winning. With the war on Iran, their prices have gone down because the country has halted exports as a precautionary measure, and they've removed sanctions on their oil, which is more, as I think it was more money than. So the argument, I think Glenn Greenwald pointed out, which again, the $1.7 billion they're talking about that were given back to Iran, that was money that was stolen from Iran. It's very easy to look up. So the claim that they just gave them money for terror, that's a lie. But you can still argue you don't think they should have given it to them, but it's their money they stole. So the point, though, is the oil money that they've gained just from the removing of the sanctions, which is theirs anyway, by the way, I guess is somewhere around $14 billion. So take a second to think about how insane that is to argue after all this time, the 1.7, and that changed everything, and you're giving them $14 billion. Why? Because they shot themselves in the foot with this situation. Everyone knew this would happen. Everyone knew that they had this potential. Everyone knew that they had their missiles aimed at all of these elements that were working with the U.S. government. And then they act like they didn't know. Trump goes, "Woo, they weren't supposed to do that." Well, yeah, you knew they were. So that's that's one of the parts that makes me question whether there's something else going on here. These are developments that are not weakening, but instead strengthening the Iranian government. Every escalatory threat from the U.S. has been met with Iran counter threats. And so far, Tehran has not bluffed, meaning that they followed through with what they said they would do, unlike the other parts of this discussion. The results have fully been truly astonishing. Now, right there, by the way, statements like that should never be taken for anything other than simply addressing the fact. Not Iran's the greatest or pro-Iran or this guy. I don't support any governments. And I think all of them will eventually lead to this exact kind of point if left to their own devices. I'm only saying that because it's very important, especially for new people to the show, because regardless of what the numbers show, we're growing every day and reaching new people. And so it's important to hear that. This is about addressing the facts, even if that fact is something I don't want to see or don't agree with, or it's still the fact. As I see it, I could be wrong, right? But that's the reality. They have not bluffed. They have followed through with everything they said, and what the U.S. government and Israel continue to do is blatantly get caught lying. That's just the reality. Now it says, the results have been truly astonishing. The U.S. not only rushed to lift sanctions on Moscow, because we're just not talking about that. It's sort of like the Guaido thing where we just stop, Guaido is the only legal president. Then suddenly they just move on because, we need to work with Maduro now because he's got things we need. It just shows you that they're feckless. They have no principles. Especially if what you were to be told that they're all monster terrorists, but now we're going to let them profit because we did this to ourselves, I guess. But not only Moscow, but has even begun to remove sanctions from Iranian oil. Though packaged by the Trump administration as strategic five-dimensional chess, these moves appear to be clear acts of desperation. Truly nothing is working out for Donald Trump. He is now figuring out why no other president dared to launch a direct war against Iran. By the way, as Robert rightly told you, now again, it's maybe still early for some people. Maybe it'll flesh out the way you think it would. But Robert has for years told you that this is how this would go. And I do believe he's right about how it's going. He said, that he's figuring out why no other president has gone this path before him, despite their strong ties. And that's a gentle way to say that to the Israel lobby. It was not due to a lack of support for Israel in the past, but rather an understanding that such a conflict would wreck the U.S. economy and likely their presidencies. Now, either Trump doesn't care about that, he's not able to say no, or he was manipulated into thinking this was somehow going to be his most important point of his legacy. Although there is no conclusive public evidence to support the theory, enough evidence exists from within the documents from the Epstein files alone to support the notion, not prove, but support the notion that the U.S. president has been compromised by Israeli intelligence. Now, I agree. I argue it. You could quite literally prove that there is influence, demonstrable, but whether he's controlled, that's a strong word. And I argue you could point out examples where Trump seems to kind of go his own route. Like maybe he sees that he's being kind of manipulated, doesn't call it out, which shows you the influence, I argue, if I'm right about that, but ultimately still kind of buffs it and stops it. And I think that shows you some level of awareness. That's all my opinion, but I think the evidence is quite clear. I think everyone's coming to terms with that. At minimum, he writes, this is what an FBI source concluded in 2020 report, the link there for you to check out. The only other explanation for launching this war is that the entire Trump administration is criminally incompetent. Well said. So going from that forward, this is what Hegseth just said. Think about where we are right now. Like, and again, that they're now dealing with, we'll get to, I mean, that's the main point for today, is the Trump administration offers a 15-point ceasefire plan, not to some lone defector somewhere, but to the Iranian government he just got done telling you are not important, aren't in control, and we shouldn't talk to them. And then they do this, which either tells you he's not even in control of this, or he just lied for some reason, or he said the truth then, and then desperation drove him to this now. I don't know. But you have to acknowledge how stupid this is. So in the midst of all this is what we keep getting from these people. I'll end with a point too later about Leavitt saying something similar. Hegseth comes out and says, never has a modern military been so rapidly and historically obliterated. Again, obliterated is very specific. In fact, I have that somewhere in here. Let's see. Yes, obliterated. Destroyed so thoroughly as to be unrecognizable or imperceptible, like doesn't exist. That's what it means. Made illegible or imperceptible by erasing or abrading away. Like it's gone. It doesn't exist. Not that it's just broken up and destroyed. No, there's meaning to these words. So what's funny to me is using it because Trump is. But so if you're going to tell us that this has been obliterated, then how are they bombing right now? Why haven't you rolled in and taken over? Because that's not what's happening. Defeated from day one, he says, with overwhelming firepower. Again, if you're not paying attention, and I don't even think Hegseth is even aware of this, but pretty much everybody with knowledge of this, whether pro-State Department information or not, was saying, look, it's not even debatable. Iran is very aware that they're going to lose. They're not even trying to really fight the air war. They knew that would happen. They dug in and they're fighting the long war. They said that before this even started. So you can't even call it a lie since they said it before we got here, and now they're literally doing it. And the experts are speaking up again, even from within U.S. discussions, are saying it's clear that they're not giving up, and it's clear they're not weak like they're being told. We're being told. Boasts about military success, defeated from day one. Historically, never have they been so obliterated. Okay. So here's what Trump said yesterday, and this is super important to get into before we talk about this article, which just goes over the large, the last 2-3 days of the defector conversation. Here's what he said, and I think the end of it is the most important. Well, I'm probably just going to skip to that for the most part, about where he said he was given a gift, right? And that it was a demonstration that showed him that this guy was real. And then the next day, he's making a deal with Iran, or trying to, and they declined it.
Another question? You haven't been here in a while.
Well, on Iran, can you give us any more sense of who exactly in Iran it is, either Whitcock, Bush, or others you're speaking with?
Yeah, we had, I hate to say this in front of these young people. They're not children. I spoke to most of them. They sound like adults to me, even though they are sort of children, right? They'll always be your children. But I hate.
By the way, somebody was saying yesterday that there might be like a group of kids that are like younger people that were right over there on the wall. It's because yesterday, remember, that wasn't what we were talking about, but I just caught that. It was like, what did he just say? Was he pointing it at Bondi? It was weird. But if that would explain it for those that watched yesterday's show, that I guess right over there, there might be, but look into it. I'd find it interesting if there wasn't. I still, all of them seem to be having little gaffes all over the place, but that aside.
To say it, but we killed all their leadership, and then they met to choose new leaders, and we killed all of them. And now we have a new group, and we can easily do that, but let's see how they turn out. We have really regime change. You know, this is a change in the regime because the leaders are all very different than the ones that we started off with that created all those problems. So this was, I think we can say, Jason, this is regime change, right?
What makes you trust them?
I don't trust anybody. I don't trust you. I mean, that's only because I know you.
I think it's important to point out again right there, right? That, I mean, again, if we're not letting partisan narratives influence us, but just if you've never seen these people in your life and you walked into this room, you would hear him saying that, and you would go, "Oh, okay, so he's suggesting that that's over, right? That they've met their goals, kind of, right? That well, they're out of the way, and we got them out of the way, and all the people that were bad. Why would you say that if the point was that we're going to go take those ones out too? It feels like he's trying to give himself a potential lane for an out. That's what a lot of people recognize, as well as the fact that you just casually discuss, well, let's see if we can kill them too, but let's see how it works out. But let's keep pretending this is some kind of Iran picking democracy situation where you're going to give them some leash and see, and then we'll just bomb them too, because just casual murder and war crimes is just where we're at today.
But if I didn't know you, I'd probably have more trust. But I don't trust anyone. Why do you say that? Why do you say what makes you trust? Do you think I trust them? I don't trust them.
Then why bother talking to them?
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday.
Isn't that funny though? I don't trust them, but they're going to make a deal. So you know that? How do you know that? It hasn't happened yet, right? So that means at some level you're trusting what they tell you, right? Words have meaning.
That was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
Is that nuclear related?
No, it wasn't nuclear related. It was oil and gas related. And it was a very nice thing they did. But what it showed me is that we're dealing with the right people. Because, you know, you don't know, because the leadership was killed, all gone. Khomeini, all gone, as the expression goes.
Except not, though, since his son is in power, right? And everyone knew who he was before this. And despite him claiming that they killed multiple layers, this was the next person. It's just funny to me how they have to bluster. And everyone can tell they're lying if we're not children.
The past Supreme Leader. And then the new Supreme Leader was racked up, at a minimum, racked up pretty good. And everyone else was gone. And then many of the people in the third tier are gone. But we're dealing with a group of people that I think turn out. And the present, the gift they made to us was very significant. And they said they were going to do it, and it happened. And they're the only ones that could have done it. Jennifer?
Only ones that could have done it, right? So what that shows me, like I said yesterday, which is important for what we're going to talk about, is that he is essentially saying, if it's the truth, that they said, I'm going to do this. And doing this will prove to you that I'm genuine. I mean, that's what that framing was right there. And they did the only one that could have done it. And so they did it. So it's for sure. And so that is definitely a level of trust, by the way, despite him wanting to be all like, I'm strong and I'm not afraid of anything. I don't trust anybody, but I trust, it's just what he does. But clearly that would suggest that they were dealing with somebody, whether it was somebody in Iran or somebody pretending to be Iranian, or he's lying about it entirely to make you think he's dealing with somebody. Today changes that entire point. So what was he given something? If not, why would he lie about that? And what are we, if it was, what are we talking about? What kind of oil related present or gift or prize are we talking about? To me, that makes it feel like it's something like the island we're talking about or something like that. So let's get into the rest of this. So here's an article originally from Yahoo News, but this, for some reason, that website was acting funny, so it's on this platform as well. Iran launches new strikes, denies Trump's claim of very strong talks. Now, this is from yesterday. Here's what happened on the 25th day of the war. Iranian missiles and drones continue to strike Israel. Now, this is really important right out of the gate, guys, because what it shows you is right there, they were not just diminished and weak and failing and obliterated at the very least, and very clearly, as everyone's highlighted, have continued to increase and made sure that the way they conducted their strikes demonstrated they were not weak, but in fact the opposite. showing, or at the very least, they held back a whole bunch of, salvos of missiles just to be able to pretend that they have a lot. You could think that way. It's worth asking those questions. But my point is that tomorrow and the next day, and they keep showing you this. They keep demonstrating that they are not, that they are far from weak and failing and obliterated. Now it says they fired missiles and drones, continue to strike Israel, and it says Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Now I'm interested by this because I haven't been able to suss this out, and I think there's more in this we'll get to, but the general point is, don't forget, and I think I've got this right here. Even Reuters reported Patriot missile involved in the last Bahrain blast was likely U.S. operated. That's from Reuters media. So, and let's not forget, this was on March 22nd. The drone point where it was shown that the Israel-U.S. elements could basically conduct drone strikes and make it look like it was Iran. And Iran made it clear that they were not going to be attacking these locations should they not be involved. And as far as I can tell, they have not claimed, at the very least, any of the attacks on these groups since the last series of attacks, when they got the Qatari major $1.1 billion installation in a lot of different locations. That doesn't mean they haven't. Clearly, they couldn't just lying about it, or maybe they did because they thought they were continuing to help, which some of them are. My point, though, is that I haven't seen that be claimed by them, and they claim that they haven't. So it's worth considering, especially with the Bahrain point, where we know that the reporting shows that it was likely U.S. operated, but they blamed Iran anyway, that it might not be them bombing these locations. Because whose interest is it to drive essentially the U.S. government to spin out and go to crazy war against everybody? Or Israel has been trying to make this happen our entire lives. And they're clearly involved with this. It's not a secret. It's not some conspiracy theory. He's literally standing next to him, pointing at things, and Trump seems to be jumping at it. Now, Kuwait, again, was the location he just claimed accidentally shot down 3 U.S. ships, U.S. planes, accidentally, with 3 U.S. munitions. I'd call BS. That's very odd to me. Funny how those are the locations. And Iraq, by the way, which is a place they're illegally occupying and hosts the PMU elements, and as well as the Iranian Kurd elements that you could argue are adversarial, right, to even Iran in some cases. The point, though, is that these are locations that don't really make sense to me, not in the way that it's being done. But it does make sense in the way that you want to make it look like Iran for certain reasons. Just question it all. And it says, even after President Trump claimed the U.S. and Iran had launched very, very strong talks, a claim Tehran has denied. Now, speaking to reporters during an Oval Office appearance later Tuesday, which is what we discussed yesterday, Trump nonetheless repeated his claim that the other side would like to make a deal. So at this point, we were going, okay, is he talking about this defector? Is there some other group? And he was suggesting that they're really in charge, and it's all kind of maybe, right? And so then that's what I'm interested in on the overlap to today. It says, quote, they're talking to us and they're making sense, Trump said. So maybe they were. Maybe he was talking to somebody not from Iran and thought it was. In the New York Times reported late Tuesday that the U.S. had sent Iran a 15-point plan, which we'll show you in a second, which they immediately denied, or rather just turned down, to end the war. So this is as of today. 2 officials briefed on the diplomacy. And now it's public reporting. Even the 15 points that they offered. Okay. Now it says the officials said the plan, which reportedly addresses maritime routes as well as Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missiles, had been delivered by Pakistan. Now, remember what Iran was saying before, which is why it already went down the way it did. They've been doing this the entire time, trying to send around other people, and they're just ignoring them. At least that's what they say. Or, at the very least, just not responding. We're not engaging. We've set the table with what we said because you drove us here. We were trying to engage. We were showing restraint, and you kept bombing us during diplomacy. So we're done. That's essentially what they're claiming anyway. And so they've been claiming they're ignoring all of these secondary messages. And so one thing I wonder is whether that's what Trump is dealing with right now, where they're sort of like sending these conversations and acting like that's what's happening. Now it says the U.S. and Iran have sent conflicting signals about possible talks. Now, to me, that's not really accurate. That's coming from sort of a U.S. perspective on the conversation. Pretty much every source I can see that has any standing in Iran has been very clear that this is not happening. Even the person who Israel claimed they were talking with. That's an important way to hear that too, because Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of Islamic Republic, the parliament, he's the one that they were pointing to in the beginning, saying he was the one he might be speaking to. Now, Israeli officials reported to central U.S. media that he was the one who was going to meet with Trump. He spoke up and said, nope, not happening. Doesn't mean he's just hiding it, right? But that's important to hear. So when they say the possible talks, Iran has sent conflicting signals. It says Trump threatened to hit and obliterate Iran's power plants within 48 hours unless the Islamic Republic agreed to fully open the strait, which we talked about. The 48 hours came to pass. But on Monday morning, roughly 12 hours before it was become the deadline, Trump said he had delayed his strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure for 5 days, claiming that the U.S. and Tehran had launched very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East, which Iran said was not true. It is unclear who the U.S. is talking to or what might come of such conversations, according to New York Times and everybody else. Asked about the possibility, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement that, quote, these are sensitive diplomatic discussions and the U.S. will not negotiate through the press. Yeah, of course. Even though they will literally tell you things they shouldn't when they want you to think a certain thing, half the time those things are untrue. This is just one of the most dishonest, just think it over. Like from Caroline Leavitt's perspective, they are always this, like they lie about literally everything. That's their job. I shouldn't even say literally, but they lie about almost everything they present to you because their job is to manage the way you view these things. And today, especially in this like cartoon falling empire we're in, everything's a lie because they have to bluster, even on things they don't have to, it seems. But so the point is, we won't negotiate to the press. It's not even, what do you mean negotiate to the press? You guys are now failing to even give it the internal intelligence community in Congress. You're not even giving them insight. And there's a part about that we'll point to. They're complaining. No one's even telling us what's going on. People who are like people like clearance who are inside the circle. I think that speaks volumes where we are. Again, guys, I wonder whether Trump is even the one in charge of what's happening. There's so many reasons why that's very possible today. I mean, in regard to like the military actions and the actual decision making. And I mean, look, taking a step back, let's not forget that Trump even said in his first administration, which is demonstrating that already in this administration, that he said he gave the military leaders the ability to make these decisions without his input. It's very easy to look up. And I think that's a very alarming point to hear with where we are right now, where Hegseth is a very clear religious Zionist and where his influence may be driven for something else or any other point we could make. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said his forces would continue, of course, to strike Iran and Lebanon. Because that makes perfect sense, right? We're in a joint war, and we're in the middle of a negotiation, and so we're going to keep bombing, though, until we... Yes, it does make sense, actually, because Israel's done it every single time. And they know that, which is why they're not even pretending this is real, from Iran's perspective. We will preserve our vital interest in every situation, which means we'll continue to illegally bomb both these locations. We'll continue to illegally steal and occupy, rape and torture. And that's what they're doing, guys, right now. These aren't just hyperbolic statements every time. They are doing that in Lebanon right now. Every word I just said. They are literally bombing schools and hospitals in every location. I'd like to think we can come to terms with this today, seeing as how it's so widely reported. So is the war about to end or not? They write. Here's everything you need to know to make sense of what's happening in the Middle East. Now, it says a new barrage of Iranian strikes yesterday showed that the regime is still capable of inflicting damage on its Gulf neighbors. Most people pointed out, too, that the amount and the timing showed you that they were not diminished like they claimed. But either way, they just told us they were completely done. They have nothing. They're completely defeated. And then they kept striking. A volley of 6 Iranian ballistic missiles killed, they tell you, 6 Kurdish fighters and wounded 30 others, according to the government of Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. Now, and this is interesting, seeing as how what they're doing with the Kurds in Iran might well make that logical to the sense of, what they see that as an element that's representing the U.S. government's interest against them. Now, it says, and this is why I question all of this. In Bahrain, an Iranian missile, they claim, killed a Moroccan contractor working for an Emirati armed forces and injured 5 Emirati service members. And you could argue, if we're talking about service members, that they might have seen them as a military target. And if they were service members and based on their involvement with the war, they would, by everyone's logic, be considered a military target. But I think there's something more to this. And it says, and the Kuwaiti army said on social media it had faced multiple drone and missile attacks. Interesting groups, right? So first of all, there are elements in Iraq that might make sense, but let's not forget there's also, I think, even more so people that are the PMU, for example, that they tell you are Iranian proxies. And so now they're bombing these locations. On top of that, Bahrain, we just showed you, we're being told that U.S. elements are the ones reported by Reuters actually in control or operating the strikes that are hitting this location in this example. So when another one hits something that seems to be, a random contractor, maybe we should ask whether that's not Iran. Or The Kuwait conversation, we were just told they accidentally shot down 3 U.S. planes with U.S. munitions. I think there's more happening here. On top of all of that, and it's not about just decidedly blaming Israel. It's not what I'm doing. In fact, like I keep saying, it's just as likely Iran, but recognizing that Israel has the ability to use drones that they can make look like Iran. And I would be willing to argue the exact reverse. Consider both of those. Now also stand back and consider the precedent and past actions and which groups continue to show that they are willing to do these and which groups continue to show restraint. Of course that matters. You can always, they're just, I can keep going further. I think it's important to play that game for some people, but maybe they're doing that to lie to you. It's like, but that is the right way to think about these things. Now, it says, speaking to reporters in Florida, Trump insisted on Monday that we are in the throes of a real possibility of making a deal. The same deal that you just literally murdered them while they were discussing, right? And it says, and that Ron wants one very badly. This is while they're literally laughing at him while he keeps saying that. Quote, if I were a betting man, I bet for it, he says. But again, I'm not guaranteeing anything. When pressed for details, Trump said that his Middle East envoys, of course, Witkoff and Kushner, had launched very, very strong talks. So right there is an obvious point. Maybe they're lying to him. Maybe they are deceiving him like they just did, according to everybody, including Trump's own people. And Trump even said, well, that's what Kushner told me. Right? Wouldn't you think he's smart enough to go, maybe they're misleading me this time, if that's what happened last time? And it says on Sunday with a respected Iranian leader. So again, to be clear, the one who he will not name, that was the Defector conversation. He's telling you that Kushner and Witkoff are the ones who spoke to him. Very suspect. He did say that it was not Iran's new Ayatollah. That's important because today they're dealing with them. Seems to belie this whole conversation. Talks would continue on Monday, Trump said, with the major points of agreement. Now, it says, as for some terms of a possible deal, the president said that the U.S. would demand an end to Iran's nuclear capabilities, which don't exist, and they already agreed to that in the JCPOA the last time and have already agreed this time. And I'll show you this yet again. Actually, this person, Dylan Williams, I'm familiar with, but he posted this, which I think is important. And I'll also include this. Which one was it? It's just God, for some reason, things are just dropping out of my mind today. This point, this was the main point. There was something I was going to add to it, but this one is as I've often pointed out for you. Dylan says Iran agreed, and it's the post from Trump saying, I don't want to say in advance, but they've agreed, but I'm going to do it. But they've agreed to never have nuclear weapons. Yeah, like they already did, right? Like they already have. Like Tulsi Gabbard told you they didn't have. Like everybody everywhere other than Israel has told you they're not even seeking, and the evidence backs that up. But it says Iran agreed to that exact point in the very first paragraph of the original Iran deal that Donald Trump, because Israel drove him to or manipulated him into, unilaterally pulled out of. This is the same plan I just showed you, where in Article 36, it explicitly says that should anyone, and it was aimed at the U.S. government, knowing, as we can see, they always do, if any of them unilaterally pull out of the deal, they have the right to continue to enrich uranium within safeguards. That's the point. Same thing with the current point today. The Witkoff lied about the 60%. As the IAE, as the International Atomic Energy Agency will tell you, that you can read for yourself, that was within their safeguards. I've included this every time. And I just think it's important to know how vividly, how obviously Witkoff was lying to everybody, knowing he's lying. And then even tried to play it off that he's just not that smart when it comes to this technology. Then why would he be in this position? Uranium stockpiles remain under safeguards in accordance with Iran's comprehensive agreement. That's the 60%, the 465 kilograms. This is from the Director General themselves at the end of 2025. Now, as for terms of the possible deal, the president said that he would demand an end to their nuclear capabilities. But it's important to hear that over and over, guys. That's not where they currently are. And I think that Trump believes, the most likely in my mind right now, if this is not something he thinks he's dealing with, this is sort of a play, as I think Robert was leaning towards as well, of simply going, well, they just agreed to not have weapons. And I did that. I'm the one that made this happen. And then just kind of going forward as if they made that happen, knowing that that's where they already are. And so even if Iran goes, oh, no, that's a lie. We're not agreeing to anything. He's going to go, oh, they just don't admit it. And we already made the deal, hypothetically. That's just one lane I can see, but you can see why that might make sense, right? That ultimately you act like you reached the deal that they've always been at. And that's a weakness. That's because you lost and you want to make it framed as if you got what you wanted. They've done this many times already. And he goes, we want to see no nuclear bomb, no nuclear weapon, not even close to it. Well, that's where they already are. And you guys have already created the situation to drive them further away from that, actually. Oh, wait, it was my spot. Here we go. Trump also said it would be easy for the U.S. to retrieve Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium. That's what it was. I'm glad I remembered that. And really just so you to read it if you haven't already, because it's really important to see the timing on this. Remember, literally the day before they bombed this stuff, the foreign minister of Oman came out and said they were willing to give up their entire stockpile. They agreed to no nuclear bomb, just like the last agreement and the one before that. And I mean, of course, you could always go, they're lying, but that's not what they're even saying. Trump keeps claiming they just won't agree to it, but they literally did. So right there, you have to understand that's either Witkoff and Jared just lying to somebody who is incapable of looking at the most basic details, kind of makes sense, or Trump knows he's lying to you. Because the reality is it's been there the entire time. And then again, he said, nope, they're going to give it up. They're going to agree to the deal. And he said, peace is actually within reach if they just let it happen. Then they bombed him, just like every other time. That's one of the most important points in this. So that's why when he says no more nuclear weapons, and he says that we'll go in and get the uranium. Well, that's what they agreed to before you bomb them. That's off the table now because you bombed them, and that's what they're saying. If we have a deal with them, going down and we'll take it ourselves, he says. Now, I argue that's an opening from probably the strategic perspective to justify an invasion, should they claim we have to go in and take it, even though they offered it freely before you bomb them. Quote, they want peace, Trump said. They've agreed they will not have a nuclear weapon. Like just the repetition, the incessant, nonstop BS. Asked Tuesday if he trusts the Iranians his administration claims to be talking to, Trump alluded to a gift, as we just showed you the video, that signaled they were dealing with the right people. So apparently dealing today is with the wrong people, but that totally makes sense because the right people was the special gift. But today you're dealing with Khomeini and Iran. And how does that make sense? Why would you deal with the wrong people? They gave us a present. The present arrived today. You just saw it. That was a very big present. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but I'll tell you what it was, or kind of. He goes on to say, the president went on to say the gift was oil related. Now it says Tehran appeared to reject Trump's claim that the two countries were making progress toward ending the war, which is now in its fourth week. On social media, the Speaker of Iran's parliament denied the direct talks had taken place. Quote, no negotiations have been held with the U.S. Now that was Kalibov, the person they said they were speaking to, and we showed you that as well. The paper added, however, that there have been initiatives by regional countries to de-escalate tensions. So another element of this is Trump could be simply pretending he's the one making something happen when what we're talking about is Pakistan or somebody else trying to drive this, to de-escalate this. Not to a place where there's any kind of an actual agreement, but just where there's no more, murder taking place. And Israel is the one that will relentlessly keep going. They've made that clear, as I just showed you. They're going to keep bombing regardless. You can't miss how obvious that is. Narrative aside, that's always the case. Prior to Trump's remarks about a deal, and again, schools, civilians, like objectively, it's on the ground. People are filming it. You can watch these things. I mean, even AP and what was it, like CTV, the Canadian platform, they casually reported they're bombing apartment buildings. It's as if it doesn't even matter anymore. Prior to Trump's remarks about a deal, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi acknowledged that he talked by phone with his Turkish counterpart over the weekend. Turkey has previously served as an intermediary. So now I'm wondering on one of the many possibilities is that whether or not this is, Turkey or Pakistan or somebody talking to them and him just trying to kind of glom onto that because he knows they're losing. Iran's semi-official news agency Tasnim, which is close to the country's paramilitary, the Revolutionary Guard, the military elements, also insisted that no direct talks had taken place, even though, quote, this is important because they're acknowledging that's the other part of it, even though messages have been sent to Tehran by some mediators. So they're saying we're getting those, we're just not engaging with it. It characterized Trump's comments as psychological warfare and claimed the tactic would not help the Strait of Hormuz return to pre-war conditions or bring calm to the energy markets. Various Iranian news agencies also sought to portray Trump as backing down in the face of threats to U.S. targets. In a video statement on Monday, Netanyahu said he had spoken to Trump, who told him that the U.S. might be able to leverage U.S.-Israeli military achievements to, quote, realize the objectives of the war in agreement with Iran. That's Netanyahu. right? Spoken to Trump, told him that they might be able to leverage their achievements to realize objectives. Like, think that through, especially with what seems to actually be happening. It's almost as if they're saying we're going to, like take, for example, hypothetically, Carg Island, and say that we're going to seize that, right? We're going to take advantage and use the leverage of our achievements to realize the objectives of the war, and then end as if that's sort of like the agreement that was made. I mean, there's, all this is hypothetical, but we know who these people are. If you've been watching with what they're doing right now in multiple countries, there's something there. But Netanyahu said that Israel would continue to strike Iran and Lebanon in the meantime, of course, because that's totally normal when you're in the midst of potential negotiations. It's totally not. Israel later said it was not part of any possible talks between the U.S. and Iran, as did Qatar. So Israel's flatly just going, we don't even care. I don't know what's going on. Now, I don't actually believe that. I think that whatever's happening, Israel's well aware of every part of it. Egypt's foreign ministry said in a statement that it had been making constant efforts to end communications with all concerning parties in recent days to avoid reaching the point of no return. So Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, it seems like they're just trying to stop this from spinning out of control, knowing that Israel is hell-bent on making that happen. And you understand, Turkey has made that clear many times over the years. Despite the more weird relationship that's actually going on there, he's been very critical of them. An Egyptian official told the Associated Press that Washington and Tehran exchanged messages over the weekend through Egypt, Turkey, and Pakistan. But that's an Egyptian official. Iran's denying that. They're saying we got him, but we're not returning any information. This is the top priority right now, the official said. I think they may be trying to drive that to happen, maybe even with good intentions. Keir Starmer from the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, told senior lawmakers on Monday that his government was aware of talks between the U.S. and Iran. Of course, he just means what Trump is claiming is happening, and that the priority was to achieve a negotiated agreement which puts tight conditions on Iran, particularly in relation to nuclear weapons. Just tired. It's just tiring how there's just lie after lie after lie. Now, when we get into the actual 15 points they put forward, it's only going to make this more ridiculous. Unrealistic. Stocks and bonds climbed on Monday after Trump said the U.S. had started productive talks to end the war, which many people argue was the entire point of what might have been a lie. The price of Brent crude and the international oil benchmark briefly dropped from $114. Do you remember a point when they were telling us over 100 could maybe collapse the world economy? And it went back down to 96, which is way higher than it was before. So this is a losing game. And it's just to try to get momentary wins. Seems very ill-advised. Then it rose to roughly 100 because that's what I keep telling you. It's a game of kind of back and forth, but what they're doing seems to be guaranteeing it's going to keep going up, which is what everyone seems to be saying. I mean, what was it? I think it was it Qatar or somebody else said it was going to go up to like 150. Like that's just estimation, but it's not a good thing. Yeah, and then it rose back up after Iran denied that they were even having conversations. Now on Tuesday, today, oil prices resumed their rise, as I've been telling you, and stocks fell in the absence of any concrete developments toward peace. The Philippines declared a national emergency, saying that high oil prices were threatening energy security. So there's that point again. Some places, Sri Lanka and others, despite the IEA saying it was, suggestions, there are places like Sri Lanka that are making it mandatory. Literal energy lockdowns. As we read on AM Wake Up, the idea of saying, if you have an odd license plate, you can only drive on these days. Guys, right now, I'm willing to bet you that you're going to find examples of this starting to roll out through this administration, even though that is identical to the point that we all fought against during COVID-19. I hope I'm wrong, but watch, because clearly, guys, this is something that they are actually involved in. And it's not just, the smart city, freedom city, Gaza, network state, digital tokens, digital control. They're building that. That's Trump's administration right now. He presented his global board of peace to the Davos, to the UN. He's all the same stuff we talk about. The point is that the energy lockdown is a part of this potential, the worry that it leads to the similar tactics, but to some kind of a global control structure. Oil and gas prices have skyrocketed in recent weeks because Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I disagree with that. Effectively is better than saying they closed because it's not closed. But remember, the point is that they threatened early on and then made it clear many times over, by the way, that they're only doing this to Israel and the U.S. and people that are helping them. Now, maybe that just suggests that everyone's afraid to go through because they're all being manipulated by Israel and the United States. Either way, they've been clear about that. And there's examples of other tankers going through. And I just think it's important to realize that it may just be the U.S. and Israel sort of gaslighting everybody to not let it happen because that's what they wanted from the beginning, to claim they shut it down and to manipulate the world opinion. The U.S. State Department issued a worldwide security alert on Sunday, urging Americans abroad to exercise increased caution after recent threats from Iranian officials and affiliated groups. Which again, guys, this is so funny to me. Actually, I'll read this too, and we'll go over both of these. It's the last part anyway. On Friday, a top Iranian military spokesman, we were told, threatened to pursue U.S. and Israeli officials beyond active conflict zones. From now on, based on the information we have about you, even parks, recreational areas, and tourist destinations anywhere in the world will no longer be safe for you. Now, there is a statement that was made. Of course, the context makes it a lot different, which is typical from your corporate media who want you to think Iran is just going, we're going to kill anybody, anywhere. No, that's what Israel and the U.S. are claiming, and they do, by the way. We'll come back to that real quickly. But so remember, the point is that alert, Iran may kill Americans around the world. Okay, well, when's the last time that happened? What do you think? Let's find out. Where was that? When's the last time Iranian government killed an American outside of a response to a U.S.-Israel attack? Which clearly makes a difference, doesn't it? If they're bombed, they respond to a U.S. base in Iraq, for example, which is pretty much most of what they're going to talk about down here. Well, the most recent confirmed case, they claim, was November 2022. Now understand, this is the confirmed case, and this is anywhere. And November 2022 is the last time they're going to put out a worldwide threat that we're going to go just kill random Americans. Why? Because that's not what Iran does, guys. Despite all the propaganda and what it says. And the operation involved specific intelligence gathering and recruitment of operatives against a perceived spy. Now, of course, maybe they're wrong. Maybe it's Iran's terrorism. They killed an American. That's how they covered it. You can consider that for yourself. But I hope you can also consider that U.S. government very much does conduct clandestine operations in foreign governments all the time. And if they were caught, then they're treated like the U.S. government would kill somebody. That's treason, or rather, not treason, but whatever the term would be for outside spy. So my point is that even this case has the layer that it says, well, there was a spy, okay? But then September 2022, even that though, guys, is not Iran killing an American wandering through some foreign country. That's very different, okay? And this one is Iranian forces launched rocket and drone strikes into Iraqi Kurdistan, right? Remember this story? Killing a U.S. citizen. The U.S. condemned this as an unjustified violation. Well, the reality, as we widely covered, was it was actually a Iranian person in a Kurdish Iranian who lived in the Kurdish area in Iraq. And yes, he had U.S. citizenship, but worked for the State Department and was aligned with the U.S. government. And the point becomes very different than killing a random American. Now, it is, to me, American is an American, whether born in the country or not. But it does make a difference for the conversation when we're talking about today, if you're talking about a person who lives somewhere else who happens to have citizenship versus somebody who is an American born in this country who they see as representing the American culture. That's the point you can make in that conversation. Either way, what we're talking about here is an example of somebody associated with the U.S. government who is illegally occupying Iraq. And you can still call it a crime if you want, but the point is it's a little bit different, isn't it? And that's the only two examples they can come up with. Before that, pre-2020, mostly attributed to other proxies they claim as Iran, which are not. And this is what they want you to feel fearful of. Iran may kill you. This is hyperbolic. This is fear-mongering. It's propaganda. And then let's address the top Iranian spokesman. And we'll come back to this. Now, this actually, I'm not familiar with the person's Substack, but this is something I came across. Seymour Rocks is their Substack. Fake news says Iran threatened to attack tourist sites worldwide. Now, if you check out every single left or right Western platform, you will get this kind of statement. And check this out, guys. Of course, New York Post is just one of the worst today. Iran makes chilling threat to target tourist sites. Oh, is that what they did? First of all, even if you take the first statement, which was inaccurate, they're claiming to target, U.S. officials in places around the world, not just target tourist sites. These are such disgusting people who are deliberately trying to manipulate you as spring break kicks off. And then, of course, you get the Jesse Water types and the Jones and the rest that all hyperbolically scream about that's what they do. So you can read this if you want. She goes over the article I'm going to show you. I think it's worth pointing out somebody who called this out, and I think rightly so, because you can look this up for the actual quote, because that matters to me. Now, I'm not going to say that maybe Iran's going to do that. Maybe that was their intention. The statement is not what they said, though. This is for Press TV, which Press TV has the interest of flavoring things the way any other platform does. but recognize that it's a perspective that's more from the what Iranian is looking at versus what the U.S. and government is. And in this case, the statement is accurate. Assassination of Iranian officials, commanders expose enemy's desperation. Here's the point. The spokesman, the general they're talking about, the general staff of the Iranian armed forces, the spokesman for the general staff of the Iranian armed forces says the U.S. and Israel are conducting acts of terror against the country's officials. They are. They're not even hiding that. They just claim they're all terrorism. So therefore, well, that's even if you claim terrorism, it doesn't make it these are non-military targets. Khamenei was a non-military target. They don't care. They've assassinated military scientists countless times, and the U.S. praises it. Those are horrible, objective crimes. In this case, Israel is conducting these attacks on officials, commanders, people like military personnel. That's considered a military target, but not like the president, for example, would not be. Well, I guess that's a different point. You could argue the commander-in-chief would apply, but let's just take like a senator, for example. Technically, that's not considered military target. Now, not because of the enemy's power, but because of their desperation, they argue that they're just assassinating anyone they can get a hold of. We know that is happening. Anyone denying that is just a very dishonest person because Israel's admitting it. It says he added that Iranian officials are living like people, which at least you could see videos of. They could be lying about that. But what do you get from the Hegseth and the rest? They're in their secret bunkers and they're terrified and they're hiding. And well, I see plenty of evidence to counter that. But again, question it. What they're saying is Iranian officials are living like people, unlike the criminal Israeli and American officials, who then you get the same thing in reverse, who are hiding in shelters and underground facilities due to their lack of ability in the face of the resistance of the brave Iranian nation. Now, look, let's be very clear about this in regard to U.S. person. When's the last time you saw any American politician wandering freely through a big open crowd? I don't think you're going to see that because they know how reviled they are. On top of that, the underground, what do you think Benjamin Netanyahu and everybody, this is a documented reality. They're always in their shelters. While Tel Aviv is the open human shield that they've admitted to. It's right underneath that. It's important. So, but again, whether you agree with the framing or not, the commander emphasized that the cowardly U.S. and Israeli officials and commanders, along with malicious pilots, troops, are under surveillance of the Iranian forces. So too are the in reverse. We know that. And it goes on to say, who are, quote, firmly determined to continue crushing attacks against enemies. He goes on to say further that based on information available to Iran, recreational areas, tourist destinations, and leisure centers around the world would no longer be safe for enemies. So clearly a little bit different than we're going to target tourist locations, clearly. But then even taking what the first point said, really what it seems to be suggesting is we're targeting military personnel, but I would still add in locations that are not militarily active. So those would still be a crime. Context, right? Also being objective and pointing out the reality, whatever side you think people are on. But the point is, it's not what they're saying, right? The idea that they're targeting tourist sites is just to get you to think Iran, everything is terrorism. Why would you need to lie about stuff like that if they're as bad as you guys all say? On top of that, even the AOL article says that you've promised to target, basically target just officials outside of certain conflict zones. It's not really the way they said that, did they? Now, really, even further, if you read the sentiment in the entire article, his point is you guys are doing this to us. So we may very well end up targeting you there. But what he said was we're watching you and we know where you are. No, that's the fact, guys. Read it for yourself. But it's disgusting, isn't it? As we know, Israel and the U.S. are deliberately doing it without even trying to hide it. They're simply saying we could do that and we're watching you. And it gets turned into this kind of hyperbolic nonsense by propaganda platforms. Now, lastly, this is just interesting. Iran says, as of yesterday, non-hostile ships can pass through Strait of Hormuz. As I was just saying, Iran has agreed to allow non-hostile vessels. Now, I believe that's what they've already done. But just to emphasize the point, to reiterate the point, not just only this group or that group, but anybody who is not hostile to us can go through. Israel and the U.S. are trying to make sure nobody sees that. I'm convinced. They need people to feel like they're restricting their actions too. Now, here again is the Ghalibaf person who said no negotiations. Just make sure you see that and says that, basically the quagmire that which the U.S. and Israel are trapped. These are all the points I was referencing within that. And here we are to the 15-point plan. So Trump administration offers, after all of that, 15-point ceasefire plan today. after claiming he had a secret person he was talking to, that it was totally not the Iranian government because they're not even exist. They don't even, that's why I played the first part of that. We killed them all, right? But now we're making a deal with them. I just don't think that makes sense other than if they're somehow doing both simultaneously. That's certainly possible, I guess. But here's what it says. The plan was submitted to Iran by intermediaries from Pakistan. So you see, that's why that point was important. So around it all, Pakistan, Turkey, it looks like they were trying to create some kind of conversation. Now, if you heard me already say it, just the point is that they've already denied this, guys, and that shows you continually if they, one, are not this weak thing, they're just could roll over and take over because they wouldn't be continually offering a deal that they know they're going to turn down while lying about some other secret deal if that's the case. But so Pakistan is the one that presented it, who have offered to host renewed negotiations between Washington and Tehran, which there's no reason why they would do that because they've been tricked and lied every single time they've done it. According to a person, the person speaking to them is the one that said Pakistan put that forward. Spoke on a condition of anonymity. It says the New York Times was the first to report that the plan had been delivered to Iranian officials. Now, this is important. Like, it's making it clear more than once that we're talking about the current government. The Pentagon is also in the process of deploying 2 Marine units that will add about 5,000 Marines and thousands of sailors to the region. Yeah, so much for the no new wars, boots in the ground, yeah, long past. Just like we all told you would happen because we were paying attention. Israeli officials who have been advocating for President Donald Trump to continue the war against Iran were surprised, they write, by the submission of a ceasefire plan. Now, what's interesting is I'm getting different reports from that. In some cases, you have officials claiming they support it, but what they're reporting is that the Israeli officials claim they were like taken off guard, surprised by the fact that Trump put forward a plan. If that's the case, I argue it speaks to more of the awareness of the dual agendas here, or at the very least that he feels even if they're on the same agenda that Israel plays him or the U.S. government often. My opinion, but if that's the case, it does speak to some kind of a schism right there. Now it says Iran has denied that any negotiations are taking place. Now this is again, like yesterday they were denying the claim of any kind of a negotiation. Now today on top of it, they're still saying, look, we're not negotiating. We're not in a place. And it's important to hear what they've set up until now. Not just that we're taking a pause. They stood up and made it very clear. We have been doing it before. We show restraint. We show compassion or whatever you want to claim. And these are things they've said. And every time we give an opening for peace, you guys take advantage. You bomb us. You violate your agreements. You have nothing sacred. So why are we going to keep pretending you're going to deal with us? Donald Trump lies to us every time. That's essentially paraphrasing what they said. Iran remains highly suspicious of the United States, which, as even AP will report, twice under the Trump administration has attacked during high-level diplomatic talks. It's actually more than that, seeing as how they've done it in the past. They've done it twice in this administration. You could even include Lebanon and Soleimani if you want to understand how this actually plays in. So that's just what they do, guys. This is a policy. It's not an accident, including with the February 28 strikes that started the current war. That's why that Oman article is important, because that very day he was saying, we're going to do this. They agreed to give up everything. And then that's why Israel rushed to bomb the country, it seems. So going forward, here is the WION platform. Trump sends 15-point plan peace plan translation from no nuclear weapon to end of sanctions. So here's what they actually put forward. This is just embarrassing, guys. I mean, honestly, it makes me think that this is designed to not happen. The New York Times quoting unnamed officials. Now, again, there's an element of that this may not be, this is what got put out, but it could be something different. In fact, we know the administration, especially Trump's, has done that in the past, like deliberately to get people to jump at the wrong thing, for example. But here's what's being reported as the unnamed official releasing. Said the United States sent the 15-point plan to Iran through Pakistan, which is confirmed by other reporting. Israeli Channel 12 said that Trump was proposing a 1-month ceasefire. The 15-point framework sent by Trump, reportedly, 1-month ceasefire, dismantle all nuclear capabilities, which means civilian too, by the way, and they might agree to that, but I doubt they will. No pursuit of nuclear weapons, already been there. Like, that's already been met. They agreed to it 3 times already, and the evidence shows they were not. And all uranium enrichment. Again, that's the same as nuclear capabilities. Uranium enrichment is used for civilian programs. And by the way, they did. So I could even, I mean, nuclear capabilities, maybe, I don't want to speak, I'm not an expert on the topic. I wonder if there's an opening there without enrichment, but let's just say for sake of conversation, they have agreed to give up their enrichment, which means the no civilian program, I would argue. And so they did. They just agreed to that. Now, I argue they're not going to now. Why would they do it again? But they did already. Number 5, transfer all nuclear material to the IAEA. Yeah, they agreed to this already. That's what the foreign minister of Oman was already saying, or at least to another counterpart, that they would downgrade it or get rid of it, or really both, to get downgrade what they currently have and then basically export it out and get rid of it all. Close Natanz, basically their nuclear sites, which, see, this is what I guess Trump was saying, that 1, 2, and 3 are all nuclear sites. Well, these things are not going to be, these are unjustifiable for obvious reasons. Unrestricted International Atomic Energy Agency inspections. Now, that's always been the case. That has been the reality since the JCPOA, even after these broken deals. Now, I would maybe say unrestricted now, but at one point, that's what the reality was. Abandon regional proxies. Come on, this is just ridiculous. So now this is the same thing they're doing with Gaza and Hamas. So you can't have any allies, because we're not talking about proxies here. We're talking about groups that they're allied with. And so right now, that's already met because they don't have these proxies, as best as the evidence shows to me. So all you're really saying is stop having any association with people you associate. That's just an effort to isolate these groups. Halt funding and arming of proxies. Well, okay, again, right now, the evidence doesn't show that that's the case, other than weapons trade, anything allies, like U.S. allies do with other people. Weapon sales, support. That's different than a proxy, guys. A proxy, for example, is what you're seeing with the Kurds, where they just basically dump everything in their hands and then direct them on what to do in Iran. That's what they're doing. The point, though, is how do you prove something that might not be happening? But if it is happening, why? They're the ones that right? Like, for example, they make a deal in Gaza or any other deal, and they go, they're lying, and don't take their word for it. So why would they there? Keep Strait of Hormuz open. Well, that's already happening. Of course, they mean for them. Limit missile program later. I don't even know what that means, later, but this again could be some kind of a truncated version that maybe we'll come back to that. They're not going to give up their ability to defend themselves. Defense only military forces. Well, if you're talking about missile program, limit it. Well, all you're going to end up doing is they're in a position where they can be taken over easily. And that's exactly what happened with Libya. Defense only military forces is just unreasonable, unrealistic. And of course, what you're ultimately talking about, anything could be used as a weapon, guys. It's just a game. Lift all sanctions. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about lifting sanctions on Iran? This is a point that Trump set forward. So Trump is asking them to lift sanctions? It's an interesting point. Then it says support Bushehr nuclear energy and snapback sanctions. At the end of the day, guys, all of this has been discussed over and over and over. It's a ridiculous time to put this forward based on what they just did. And that shows weakness. Think about this. Again, he just said that these people are gone. No one's in power. They don't even know what's going on. They're all hiding in their bunkers. That's why we're speaking with this guy who's high up and he's the real. And then today you do this? Either not in control or desperately spinning out. Here's what they said. U.S. very close to meeting main goals in Iran, while Iran is going, no, thank you. How do you not see that as weakness? Now, if this ends up where they're lying and this all comes to pass the way he said it would, well, then that's what we'll report when it comes to pass. Right now, the evidence doesn't suggest that. The evidence clearly shows for example, what we just showed you in regard to the back and forth, Trump is being caught saying things that you can prove aren't true. Now, as I said, that may mean something or it may mean something else. What I think it clearly suggests is that if you have to lie about that, then you're in a weak position. That's always been clearly, I've stated my opinion. My point, though, is that, anything could change tomorrow. I just think that it's unlikely that's going to go that direction. But if it does, what it would probably suggest would be that this was something that they were trying to maneuver because there was like with Syria or Venezuela. And that makes sense that you're hiding the transition. But let's be real. It's a crime. The whole thing, everything they're doing. And this ultimately means that they're surreptitiously doing it anyway. And again, lying about a deal to get what they want. It's what they do. Iran dismisses the ceasefire plan, which is I don't know why. And again, I think the U.S. knew this would happen because they already told them that. Iran on Wednesday dismissed the American plan to pause the war, issuing its own counterproposal. And I'll show you that next. And then launched more strikes on Israel. And they claim Gulf Arab countries. Again, I'm not sure if I can verify that, seeing as how they're not seeming to claim those. But it says Iran issued its own plan via state TV, which includes a halt to killing of its officials, means to make sure no other war is waged against it. Which, do you really think Israel is ever going to give anything up? reparations for the war, which they'll never do, the end to the hostilities, and Iran's exercise of sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, reparations for the war, can you imagine what a future administration would say if Trump gave them money, just like they're trying to make it about Obama? It's just, they're not, I don't think this is going to happen. Iran says no negotiations will take place until their 5 conditions are met. And this is what they already were saying before this. Iran also says it will end the war at a time of its own choosing and only if the conditions are met that it has set forward. Now, this is the Kubisi letter and just gives you the 5 conditions, and then we'll read it directly from one of the platforms, or 2 of them, in fact. Iran has officially rejected the U.S. proposal, and their conditions include 1, immediate end to attacks and assassinations on Iran. Which it's a crazy they have to even say that, seeing as how they're all crimes, and the world should do something about that, or at least just acknowledge that objectively. Establishment of concrete guarantees against future U.S. attacks, which what is that going to be? Liars telling you they promise? I don't know, but at least they're putting it there. Clear determination of guaranteed payment for war damages. I just doubt they'll ever do that. An international recognition of Iran's authority over the Strait of Hormuz, which it's the reality, guys. It's like any other thing. It's like the U.S. and it's like Suez Canal. And it's the same point. They just go, bad guy. And then I don't want, we don't agree. Not their prerogative. An end to the war across all fronts, including for all Iranian proxies in the region. Now, that's how this is being framed. That's not what Iran is saying. We now await response from the U.S. What they're really saying is an end to all the war across all fronts. And Lebanon, Syria, any of them, Gaza, Hamas, they're not going to do that. Israel will refuse. Iran rejects U.S. proposal, lays out 5 conditions for ending the war. Iran has responded negatively to American proposal aimed at ending the ongoing imposed war, insisting that it will only occur on Tehran's own terms and their timeline. The official, with knowledge of the details of the proposal, speaking exclusively to Press TV today, said Iran will not allow U.S. President Donald Trump, this is important, to dictate the timing of the war's end. So at least it feels like they think they're in a position of power, right? And if Trump clearly is trying to draw this to an end and maybe even lying about things, it seems to speak about weakness. But again, this is all writing on the wall. It's hard to know for sure. Or rather the tea leaves, I guess, is the right way to say that. The point is that they're saying, we're not going to let you wrap this up, because what they think is this is them, confronting their weakness. Like basically threat. We didn't follow through. We didn't believe you. And so now Trump is being forced to walk it back, but can't say that. So he has to frame it as somehow him having a success, because that's what weak people do. Quote, Iran will end the war when it decides to do so, and when its own conditions are met, the official said, emphasizing Tehran's resolve to continue its defense and inflict heavy blows on the enemy until its demands are fulfilled. Which, by the way, those demands were not being demanded until the U.S. government and Israel illegally started this war. They were being discussed, right? There was conversations, but they're the ones that drove this to an ultimatum, all or nothing standpoint. But now watch as they carry on blaming Iran for that. Every time. According to the official, Washington has been pursuing negotiations through various diplomatic channels, putting forward proposals that Tehran views as excessive and disconnected from reality. That's my point. That's been not just these last 2, but continually. They've been just going, we're done with this. I've been telling you that. The official drew parallels with 2 previous rounds of negotiations held in the spring and winter of 2025, characterizing them as deceptive. Yeah, that's a soft word, seeing as how they literally murdered people in the negotiations. In both instances, the official stressed the United States had no genuine intention to engage in meaningful dialogue and subsequently carried out military aggression against Iran. Isn't it funny how you get this framing? Where is this anywhere else in the conversation? No, don't believe that. You shouldn't make that. Shouldn't then turn. It shouldn't create the thought that then Press TV is always the truth or that they're the right one. It's not the case. But just realize that there's a perspective you're getting from Iranian people and Iranian media. There's nowhere else in the conversation. They're just going, look, we're done. This is so obvious that we are not. But again, it could be bluster. They could be fronting that kind of strength. To me, it doesn't seem likely. Tehran has therefore categorized likely that they're bluffing. It seems that this is the reality. Tehran has therefore categorized the latest overture, which was delivered via friendly regional intermediary, as a ploy to heighten tensions, and it responded negatively. Now, again, think about this. Why would they, through an intermediary, send this plan to a group they just told you is irrelevant, while allegedly dealing with somebody they just told you was actually in charge? I just don't see how that possibly lines up. The official outlined 5 specific conditions under which Iran would agree to end the war, which we already read for you. The official further noted that these stipulations are in addition to demands previously presented by Tehran during the second round of negotiations in Geneva, which took place just days before the U.S. and Israel carried out a fresh round of aggression on February 28th, starting this whole illegal war, or continuing it really when you understand how it's always been going. But that's very important to hear. So not just saying just these 5, but everything else we've been demanding, and that's where you put us. That's where you have driven this to. Iran has communicated to all intermediaries acting in good faith that the ceasefire is contingent upon the acceptance of its conditions. That's it. No negotiations, they say, quote, will be held prior to that. The official stressed, reiterating that the continuation of Iran's defense operations, because, I mean, if anyone's trying to frame this as anything other than that, this is not a Russia-Ukraine thing, guys. This is very clear. They have not been, I mean, at this point now, there are cases I can see right now where they are initiating attacks. But point, though, is this is a war of defense from their war of aggression. And clearly, as they've already demonstrated, this would stop if they stop. You may disagree with that, but I would bet anything that that's the way it would go because they've done it before, and every action they do seems to suggest that exact reality. The difference, though, is that now Israel and the U.S. are on their back foot, not just kind of momentarily, but because of where they put themselves. Strait of Hormuz, the whole thing. It says the end of the war will occur when Iran decides it should end, not when Trump envisions its conclusion. That's very important, and I guarantee you that is driving him crazy. They put out this video of like a little Lego video with actually a pretty catchy song calling him a loser. And I guarantee it got, and my opinion is that stuff really bothers him. Because, and my point as well is that's I think a bad move because it's probably going to drive him to act irrationally, and that's probably not in their interest. Iran wants Lebanon included in any ceasefire. Now that's super important. You know why? Because Israel is not going to give that up. That's a reason that I made it important to make this, to include that. They just kind of absorbed Lebanon into this current motion, knowing that that doesn't even line up with their narrative, despite that, Lebanon is Iran or whatever they're claiming. But realize, guys, that the Lebanese government is largely on the side of their agenda, and there's lots of people in this country. And so you're effectively bombing the country, which is even at least half on your side to a degree, or, there's a nuance there. But they're just bombing indiscriminately, bombing people's homes. But that's the same when they bomb Syria and bomb even government buildings. And the government there goes, we don't care. This is fine because they're working with them. And those are the terrorists they put there, just like every other place they work with. But Iran correctly is making this case that when we do a ceasefire, not like with Gaza, this all has to stop because it's all part of the same conversation. We all know that. I just think that's going to very clearly cause a problem for the negotiations, which is probably what they're trying to accomplish, knowing that they're not really truly engaging with this. Now, to wrap up here, there's some points that we just need to see. With all we just went through, the absurdity of what you're about to hear, it pales in comparison to anything I've ever seen. Like, it gets worse every day. And I think it's not just because they're just especially bad liars. I do think that. I mean, KJP was probably one of the worst, to be honest. But nonetheless, it's the situation they're in, right? It's in addition to, it's the situation they're in. It's like I've said before, when you're lying about everything, eventually you're going to contradict something you've lied about before. But imagine being in this position where all you do is lie. And now on top of that, the government narrative and everything around it is lie. You are going to make yourself look like a fool. And speaking of fools, here's Eric Dougherty just going, breaking news. Whatever Caroline said like earlier in the day, so it's not breaking news, confirms that Iran is literally begging President Trump for a deal and for the war to stop. As always, these people deserve ridicule. It's embarrassing. The kind of ones, even if that ends up being the truth, a journalist does not blindly report what the government says they want people to think. That's just stupid, guys. That's just bad. That's not intelligent anything, especially with how often they've lied to us over the years. But then, even if that's the case, look at what we're dealing with right now. What indication anywhere is there that they're begging Trump for a deal? Not even Trump is saying that. First of all, his need a deal very badly came from this alleged single person yesterday. Then today, they send a 15-point plan that Iran immediately denies. And then they kind of continue to get. So how does that look like begging for a deal, Eric? Now, this gets even more embarrassing when you listen to Carol and Leave It.
Mission continues unabated. From the outset, President Trump and the Department of War estimated it would take approximately 4 to 6 weeks to achieve this critical mission. 25 days in, the greatest military the world has ever known is ahead of schedule and performing exceptionally.
Is it just cringy? Because look, the real thing is, there's nobody in the conversation that's like, that's all. This is people who are proud to gloat or to overdo the narrative. Like they just want to support the team, you know. And they, like the idea is, I don't think anybody anywhere, even her, actually thinks that's the reality. But they've just gotten so comfortable with, well, we're supposed to overdo it. Isn't that what we all do? Isn't that what Trump wants from us? To just constantly push out the biggest, most. That's what Trump does every single time he opens his mouth. Even if you're in the number one position, it becomes not just that we're the leader, but we're the leader of all leaders that have ever led in the history of leaders. It's just dumb, and everybody knows it. I don't know why we don't laugh about that. And I mean, there's plenty of things that I think were way worse about Biden, but this is especially bad for him. And it's just something that has become obnoxious for most people who are just tired of pretending like it's not obvious. And this is our government. It's where we are today. And so what she's saying is, you know, the most powerful military. Now, the U.S. government has very clearly spent the most on its military. But the real question, and what we're very clearly coming to terms with today, is that the representation of being the most powerful militarily is not necessarily what the U.S. is doing today, or rather what they've invested in. Like, we have been manipulated. Like the fact that we've got like 11, all the aircraft carriers, the war has changed, as everyone is now coming to terms with. As Rubio told you, their drones and what they're building, they're going to eventually surpass us. Yeah, but let's spend $30 million more on a single jet. You know, like it's clear that we have been dragged into this military industrial complex that's kind of lumbering into this technocratic complex. It's all the same conversation. They'll just keep spending money on things they want you to invest in that don't interest Americans at all, because it's about the system. How long have I told you this country, rather, as always, this government runs on the blood of other governments, other nations? I just can't get that right today. The point is, clearly they're not us. The government's doing it. But what they're doing is running on the blood of other nations, the peoples. How do we not see this? This country, this government, and the country, because the government's the one running it to the ground, would ultimately collapse should the war industry stop. I don't know why we can't see that. So all of this is in like any historical point. This is a dying empire, and everyone's starting to call that out. That doesn't mean the American people or what civilization we can create going. It's this government that we're talking about.
From the outset, President Trump and the Department of War estimated it would take approximately 4 to 6 weeks to achieve this critical mission. 25 days in, the greatest military the world has ever known is ahead of schedule and performing exceptionally. Day by day, the Iranian regime is being crippled, and their ability to threaten the United States and our allies is being significantly weakened.
Oh, weakened. Didn't Trump say it was obliterated? Didn't Hegseth say on day one they were obliterated? He did. So maybe you guys should get on the same page about your terms and understand what's really happening. And even what she just said is objectively not true. Every day they're showing you that's not the reality, but they just keep saying it. I don't know what you call that other than weakness, or I guess being misinformed by your allies is possible.
Their ambitions of building a nuclear weapon have also been crushed to an
See my point?
even greater degree.
Oh, an even greater degree. Oh, see, because she just can't get past the fact that it was obliterated, and anyone saying otherwise is fake news. And now it's back, and now it's even more obliterated than it was ever obliterated in the history of obliteration. Keep going. Doing great.
Than they were in Operation Midnight Hammer in June
when it was obliterated.
2025. That's why you're beginning to see the regime look for an exit ramp.
Oh,
They
you
recognize they are being crushed, their ability to attack American and ally forces, as well as their ability to defend their own territory is dwindling.
I mean, look, aside from the last point, which they included that for a reason to say, that's what they keep doing. Our jets are controlling the airspace. Again, that was a given. They didn't even really fight against that. Now, that's a superiority for sure, but that's not going to win the war unless the point is to just nonstop carpet bomb every single thing, which is kind of where they're leaning into, and it's kind of what Israel's doing. The point, though, is that they have dug into this and planned for this exact kind of thing. The genocide included, by the way, and that's nobody's fault other than the U.S. and Israel. But just think about what she is saying. They're desperate for a deal. This is not represented anywhere in the conversation.
Literally hour by hour. Following President Trump. June 2025. That's why you're beginning to see the regime look for an exit ramp. They recognize.
And that's demonstrated by Trump offering a plan that they flatly deny twice, because that just perfectly makes sense.
They are being crushed. Their ability to attack American and ally forces, as well as their ability to defend their own territory, is dwindling.
Dwindling, okay. But yeah, defending, maybe, but not in the sense of what we're talking about on the ground, because they are effectively largely defending. But their ability to attack, they keep trying to sell you on the idea that it's just dwindled and losing every day. Even the corporate media is admitting that's just not true. So why did they keep lying? You know the answer. I mean, there's the most logical answer anyway: weakness.
Literally hour by hour. Following President Trump's powerful threat on Saturday evening, it was made clear to the United States that Iran wanted to talk.
Oh, yeah? His powerful threat that they laughed at. They literally laughed at you guys. They sent videos. Now, again, you could argue that's bluster. And even behind the scenes, maybe they're cowering and wanting a deal. That's possible. I don't know why we would take it at face value. And again, the physical reality does not back that up.
President Trump is willing to listen. As President Trump announced on Monday, the United States has been engaged over the last 3 days in productive conversations, which led the president to temporarily instruct the Department of War to postpone planned strikes against Iranian power plants and
crimes, by the way, massive crimes. But what she just talked about was that supposed secret defector point. But that's not what we're dealing with today. So I kind of get the sense they're just trying to mash those things together and hope that we don't catch on.
energy infrastructure only.
But yeah, here's Eric going, woo, we did it. We won. They're over. They're losing. And tomorrow it'll be something else. And whatever they said was breaking news. Obliterated is very clear, as I said before. Destroyed so thoroughly as to be unrecognizable, imperceptible. It means it is gone. Not a annihilation is a good a synonym. It just means it's completely ceases to exist. And so you can't, again, you could make it more, being too specific, but those are words he used. It's words he's repeatedly stressed and then used again. And then they're bombing. And we obliterated them and then they're bombing. It's just, we have to laugh at how dumb that is. Well, exactly. And then here is an even more ridiculous thing that she just said.
President Trump does not bluff, and he is prepared to unleash hell. Iran should not miscalculate again. Their last miscalculation cost them their senior leadership, their Navy, their Air Force, and their air defense system. Any violence beyond this point will be because the Iranian regime refused to understand they have already been defeated and refused to come to a deal.
Oh, okay. I guess they're not aware. They're stop firing your rockets, Iran. You've already stopped the ability to fire them. Didn't you hear that? Haven't you learned that you're not capable of doing the thing that you're doing right now? Stop. You've lost already. I just don't understand where they think this is going. You could genuinely argue this is just incompetence and somehow they are winning and they just don't know how to relay that to you. Kind of would make sense, but my God. And also just take note of her, literally reading line to line and stumbling her words. These people are off their balance, guys. We have to be able to see that. I just think this is, the ideal, I got to play that again.
Force in their air defense system. Any violence beyond this point will be because the Iranian regime refused to understand they have already been defeated.
Yeah, you've already lost. Makes sense, right? As demonstrated by their repeated attacks, as demonstrated by their continued deals returned to you, as demonstrated by your continued capitulation to them. I just think this is crazy. All I'm trying to highlight today is the obviousness of where it all points. I was clear in the beginning that I don't think this is definitive at all, but I think it's very clear where most of this is leaning. Now, to end in general, the idea of where this is going to go, it seems. As Nathan points out, we went from no more wars to Fox News showing where U.S. troops are going to invade Iran. That's what they're showing, guys. They're just normalizing this. This is important to see. This is where it's going. They're trying to get you okay with this possibility. Take it on the chin, right? That's what they're actually saying. Okay, gas prices are going up. It's okay. It's okay to stop them from getting a nuclear bomb. That's not what's happening. True Stream Media says this is like a test to see how far people who have been propagandized their entire lives can be driven to support their own demise. Glenn Greenwald, bombing somewhere and then waiting for rescue workers and first responders to show up to also bomb them is called a double tap. We've talked about this for a long time. It happened a lot in Yemen, Saudi Arabia. It happened a lot in Syria. It happened a lot in Gaza. And we covered, and gee, can you find the correlation there? It's one of the worst in my mind, war crimes. What you're doing is you are bombing a location. In fact, have you seen I'm forget the name of the movie now. Anyway, the point is, bomb a location with the intention of drawing in the medical workers. And then you really bomb them. They do this. Israel has policy names for these things, like the Dahir Doctrine, or mowing the lawn, or they've literally write down why this is it's about maximizing the psychological terror. It's about the harm to children and women. They write about these things. In this case, U.S. drones, and this is from 13 years ago. This is just Glenn speaking with The Guardian. U.S. drones strikes target rescuers in Pakistan, and the West stays silent. Reports from the 25th from Tehran that U.S. and Israel struck a rescue site while rescue workers were trying to clear the rubble from the site previously struck by U.S. and Israel. Now, these are reports, but if you understand that they have, my entire life, every war they've ever been involved in, either one of them, they have done this verifiably. That's why Glenn is showing you this, because it is something that they've done before, and it's happening again. That's the people we're dealing with here, guys. That's who they are. Now, if you haven't seen this, effective April 20th, as Steve pointed out, interestingly, doing this on the kind of unofficial cannabis holiday, the U.S. Army is increasing the maximum enlistment age from 34 to 42 and eliminating waiver requirements for a single conviction of marijuana. Interesting. Well, seeing as how that's not the idea that's most states in this country have already agreed that it should be recreational. They're giving you something that they should have already done legally a long time ago. But the point about that is not even giving you anything. They're only saying, we just want a conviction. We'll ignore. We'll still convict you for cannabis, though. How dumb that is. But think how insane this is. You're increasing it by 8 years, right? You are literally. If you understand what this means, by the way, this is like the select service point. You are saying that people can now be drafted up until they're 42 years old. It always, from I remember, it used to be something like, this does say enlistment age, but understand that does overlap with the idea of if and when a draft is to come to play. That's where that comes from. The point, though, is that it used to be something like 25 or long. It's because of the obvious point. Now you got 42-year-olds going to war. That doesn't seem like it makes much sense for most average 42-year-olds. But either way, what do you think this suggests? Is this the peace president? Is this what winning looks like? Or is this the obvious implication that we may be going to the very war you all swore would never happen if we voted for Trump? Dave DeCamp also points out, Mayor Lee Hill points out that the House Republican who chairs the Armed Service Committee after a classified Iran briefing said the Trump admin is not giving Congress enough information about plans for the U.S. troops in the Middle East. So that's what I was saying earlier. I think I said intelligence, but it's the Armed Services Committee. Classified briefings, where they're supposed to be informed of what's going on. Because otherwise, you just have executive branch doing whatever it wants, which guess what, guys? That's where we have been for a long time. Mike Rogers, just out of a classified briefing on Iran, said the Pentagon isn't providing enough information about the administration's plans in the Middle East. In particular, troop movements. We want to know more about what's going on, what the options are, and why they're being considered, he told reporters, and we're just not getting enough answers on those questions. Dave DeCamp says, seems significant. Yeah, you know why? Because, guys, they're literally talking about deployment right now. Fox News is talking about where they're going to go in Iran. And as I've been telling you, there are already elements that have been deployed. They told you this already, in fact, but we know the Kurds are there. We know that there was elements of this long before this, including intelligence. In this case, if we haven't come to terms with the fact that this is actually happening, everything you were promised has been lied about. Yeah, you could be talking to people that voted for Biden. You could talk to people that voted for Trump, for Obama or Bush. The same point applies. I shouldn't say everything, but the point is that these people are always giving you what they think you want to hear, and they always seem to be aiming in the same direction. Until we can come to terms with that, this will continue to be the case. The U.S. is deploying thousands of Marines to the Middle East. Here's what they could be used for. Nobody supports this, guys. Not even other than the team sport players and people being paid to say so, most Republicans are adamantly against this, including the war itself. As Ryan Grimm points out, Israeli media now reporting that Netanyahu expects a ceasefire announcement from Trump this Saturday. Translation, Ground invasion coming this weekend. Now, it's kind of a joke, but not. Because this is what happens every time. That's what Iran's telling you every time. They well, let's come meet for a negotiation, and they bomb them in Lebanon. Let's meet for a negotiation. They kill Khamenei. Come on, Salwani. Let's talk about peace, which is what they offered him, and they bombed him in the Iraq airport. It's what they do. It's not an accident. So, if he turns out to be correct, it'll be important to talk about. Lastly, two things I want you to think about on the way out. Brian, it's really just this one for the most part, but Brian Berletic posted put this post out. The quote, blame Israel strategy is part of years of U.S. policymaking regarding a United States war on Iran. Now, this is very much worth your time. And he's really referencing the Which Path to Persia document we've covered a lot. What's important about this is there are elements that you can hear, you can see this. But just because it's written down from one think tank or plenty about the idea of how to frame this as Israel's fault does not necessarily mean that Israel is not influencing, if not controlling, U.S. policy. It could. And what he really gets at is it's sort of the other way around, that Israel's U.S. proxy. And a lot of people make that argument. Look, in my mind, either way you look at it, it's the same issue. Different, but the same problem we're dealing with, right? So I think it's still nonetheless worth hearing this and considering this. You know what I think. I think the evidence is pretty clear. But it's worth considering whether maybe I'm missing something, or maybe there's a different way to look at it and consider whether or not this is, like I've been talking about, this is why I'm often trying to point out that demonstrating our value, the objectivity we offer, because very few do that it's possible, right? That this is what, the idea that Israel tricked Trump, it was just to get people the out, to say we knew Trump was not the one. And that's what Glenn Beck is doing. That's what Alex Jones is doing, right? Surprise, surprise. So think about that and consider whether or not this might be a double-edged sword. Maybe it's one way or the other. My mind is I think it's a little bit of both, like I've said before. But I think you can clearly argue that there's elements of this that show, and let's even put it like this. You could argue that Israel is able to basically control U.S. policy, but that these think tanks will still sit around and go, look, we can do this, and then basically suggest that it's Israel, and even that's not even inaccurate. You see my point? But there's a lot of ways you could look at it. All I'm saying is consider a different opinion. And what Brian is putting forward is evidence-based and worth your time to consider. And this is just people talking about the, where they perceive him being sort of missing the boat when it comes to the technocratic perspective. And that you could consider that. I think it's important to consider the opinion regardless, because it opens your mind to another way to look at things, which is always in your interest. Being able to consider other opinions without fully adopting them is just simply a sign of intelligence. Now, this one is something else somebody sent to me. Straight Theater is what it's called. Now, I'm not really familiar with the Substack, but it's an interesting read, and I do think it's worth your time. And what it really gets into, and I'll just read the opening, this was not a war. It was a restructuring exercise carried out under the cover of one. The U.S. has done this before: manufacture or accelerate a crisis, let the disruption clear the board, then move in as the stable, expensive alternative. Gulf of Tonkin, Iraq WMDs, Ukraine. The pattern isn't new. What's new is the scale of the commercial infrastructure that was already waiting to absorb the outcome. Energy infrastructure was repositioned, trade corridors were reset, proxy liabilities were burned off, market share was redistributed, and the region's financial architecture was quietly re-engineered, while the public drowned in spectacle. The violence supplied the legal, political, and insurance rationale for outcomes already mapped in filings, planned documents, and funding commitments years before the first fake missile was launched. They call it a war, it was a business deal, and they were all in on it. Now, I very much think it is worth your time to think about this. But as I just said, the idea, for example, that before the fake missile was launched, this exact opinion could be the truth, and there could also be a real war, or just real missiles, people dying. Like we talk about, false flags could mean faked, or it could mean actual people dying, but it's still just, it's a manipulated situation. You're blaming it on somebody else. These people do not have qualms about killing innocent people, guys. But also the idea that everyone was in on it, right? Maybe, like I said at the beginning, it's certainly possible, like with COVID-19, we did get that insight that this is some kind of coordinated plan. But it's hard for me to wrap my mind around with everything we're seeing happen, with what's being done by Israel. Like maybe this is the plan and Israel's the anomaly causing this to be a problem. There's so many ways you could look at it. All I want you to be able to consider is that this very well may be something larger than just an ongoing war, maybe even to the point to where it's all wag the dog and it's about like I've been talking about, reimagining of society, the re-engineering of where this all goes. But as I said, to end, I do think there's little both. And I think that what you're seeing is very much what she's talking about. The planned out elements of how this would go. But I do still think that, just like always, there's internal divides. There are different agendas. There are people that maybe care more about their personnel than not. And there are differences. So consider both, because I very much do think that what we're seeing is a transition. But I do think that the war is real. I think that there are people dying, and I think that there are different agendas at play. And as Whitney would point out, that there are different global agendas. There are different elements that ultimately want to control your life. They want to control your life, your family, your direction, surveil you, but they disagree on how to end up. Whether it may be a religious Zionism perspective or it's a technocratic perspective, or maybe those are the same thing, you can decide. But consider it. Because so many people out there want you to just pick a side, choose a discussion, and just follow through. It's not in your interest. Question everything, consider all possibilities, because that argument is very sound. But, you could argue there's just parts that are added to it. So thank you for tuning in, guys. This is what we do here, right? This is why you guys come here. This is why we continue to do this, because there's so much out there that is trying to kind of trap you in these ideological bubbles and false information front, basically algorithmically control the way you see things and just kind of trap you in these little false logic bubbles. Don't fall for it, right? As long as you're willing to stand back and consider everything with an open mind, even if you ultimately come back to the same point where you disagree with it, but openly consider it, then they won't be able to trap you. We'll fall for it here and there, but if you keep doing it, you'll see it and you'll pull back and you will fall away from it. You will eventually stop falling for it in the first place, I would argue, but just keep pushing, because I believe strongly that we're watching this change, and what we're watching play out. And I just mean from like right there, more so an American perspective, that this is something that they're spinning out around. Like they're losing that control. And that shows us that we're having influence in the conversation. Now, I don't obviously want there to be negative consequences. I don't want people to be hurt. I don't want this to cause economic collapse, but it may be the reality regardless, unfortunately. I hope not. But if it is, it's because of the people that we're trying to stop. The answer is not to let those broken people keep doing the problem because they've trapped us in the problem, right? That's the same logic as Trump and Israel and whatever else. That, well, he had to fight from within to stop them from doing the worst thing. So the answer was to let them keep doing the thing? No, guys, that's never the answer. Never. I know you know that. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.